snippets, asset store, and just Unity stuff in game development. And I don't know, there's a lot to talk about, and I guess we'll just kind of dive right back into the conversation. So as I was trying to tell everybody before I broke everything, Jason's working on this cool new asset for the asset store, and we've been talking about it for the last 30 or so minutes, and I think it's something interesting to share. And you want to just briefly tell everybody what it is, and I'll pop it up on the screen. I know I've made you like share this already, and then I killed it, but hopefully it's not too bad. And this will be the second time through and kind of explain what it was you were building. We'll just talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. So just as a caveat here, this is literally like day one. It's something we're doing in our free time, so it's not an ongoing active thing. We'll be putting time towards it over the next few weeks. Effectively, we kind of realized that one thing I really like is a good kickstart when you're working on a project is to have like a bunch of nice assets to begin with, and there's not a lot of kind of example scenes which are meant to be as close to AAA as you can get. So I'm in a lucky position where I have a friend of mine, Nick, who's a really good artist, and so he's going to put together a whole load of cool modular guns and do all of the nice animations and things for them. And then my job is to just make them run and act as guns. And so we're going to put together some UI and some various different, recoil effects and kind of some of those over-the-top fun weapons. And hopefully we'll have different texture sets so that it can look like a sort of military-ish style thing, or it can be a bit more wacky as well. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at the moment. I was just bringing it up because I was talking to Andrew here, and I was like, I'll need his help at some stage because he's the asset guru, so he's the guy to talk to.
Yeah, he's definitely knows a lot more about it than the rest of us. Like I was saying earlier, I put up an asset that I had 0 sales on because I had no idea what I was doing. I put it up, and over like I think a 2-year period, it's at 0 sales still at $5, and I'm pretty sure I made it free, and it was still at 0 sales. Or Andrew's like just kind of crushing it there.
You have you have a $5 orc pack, orc caster and fighter pack.
Yeah, that's the one.
that is class. That's old looking. It looks old. And the other one you have is a multiplayer VR kit, which it's got 16 reviews, which is pretty good. But all from the last 2 years are saying it doesn't work, unfortunately. So
yeah, it's because it's built on Unet.
Yeah,
so it's all built on Unet, which got kind of deprecated and died off. And I was waiting for like the next Unity networking replacement to put it into there, but it never really solidified, or it didn't solidify in the time where I kept interest in the project and kept working on it. So I thought I had completely deprecated and removed both of those. Actually, the orc one, like I said, I'm pretty sure it never sold at all. I thought it made it free and it still never sold, but I should just switch it to free if I hadn't already. But
yeah,
so the other one was good though.
No, we were talking about with Jason with your the weapons pack that you're working on, which looks really cool. We're talking about making a demo scene that was really robust, really full featured, assets from the asset store for the environment, and I don't know, particles too, maybe. What are you thinking of your demo scene? Like, I guess to clarify, this isn't the demo scene you get with the package necessarily, I guess, or maybe you do, but you need to buy all the other packs to make it work. Otherwise, the prefabs all break.
That's the struggle, isn't it? Right? Because again, so we have an artist, we have a guy who can make an entire AAA looking scene if he wants to. But then, like, are you selling a gun pack now, or are you selling the entire process of an environment and all this stuff? And the truth is, like, that's not cheap to make if you're going for actually making enemies and environments and doors and then texturing them correctly and, substance painting the whole lot and then doing the whole, and then that's not even separate from conceptually like level designing it and going through all that stuff. So the truth is, it would undervalue an asset to sell that with it. So that the truth is, we'll probably make some stuff ourselves, some stuff we'll find in the asset store, and we do want the package you get to be robust enough that you can drop into a scene if you download the sample scene and play something. And I've never really liked having it be the classic Unity white box. Like, there will be textures, there will be stuff. It's just the difference between you getting like trees with particles that like flow when you hit them and stuff versus there's a tree shape that's a tree. You know what a tree is. So yeah, it's tough. It's something we haven't really settled on, and I think it's going to come up as things like particle system too. Like, you can get some really nice pre-made particle systems where somebody has put their heart and soul into making really great organic particles with all these firing effects and stuff, or we can just put some shuriken particles and kind of make it work. And I guess the thing is that you want to look as good as possible to demonstrate what because the point is the guns plus the code. That's what you're kind of there for. And so that's the bit that should be front and center. All the rest is like, if you add on to this, you can get to here. But again, like I'm never a fan of an asset pack that literally says, now download these other 6 assets before you can use it. So I don't actually want to include that. I would rather have that be a playable scene and then say, here's a version that requires nothing, and here's an example download you can get, which might require DoTween and a few other bits just to kind of shore it up a bit. But you're going to need to provide environmental stuff yourself because, you know, quite frankly, that's not what we're trying to make.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd say you definitely want to make sure you're including some particles and like sound effects, like the core stuff, like the muzzle flashes and like some sort of a dust impact or something like that. But yeah, outside of that, just making it swappable and making it so they can adjust it is the most important thing. I'd be a little bit worried about putting a DoTween as a requirement for something for the side stuff, only because people might want to pull it into their project and then just not because of that. But I don't know that it's that big. Or I mean, just like any code dependency, not DoTween specifically, but just having any code package dependency. I could see the art ones.
Well,
but
that's the thing too.
A code one might be harder to convince people, especially if they're like, I don't like DoTween, I like lean tween or whatever. Like, no, this is all terrible.
Well, I will say from a sheer design perspective, I will design it in such a way that you can literally provide any tweening library you want or write your own. But I guess my point is I don't want to write an entire one just for the sake of an asset, because again, it's the same thing. So I use DoTween myself, and it kind of feels a bit counterintuitive to make a lightweight, less feature-filled version of DoTween just to release with an asset that I wouldn't use myself, that I would recommend using DoTween for. So I would probably provide the basics, but I guess part of it for me isn't just the weapons. Like you can make a gun and fire and whatever, but often I think the bits that are missed are the flourishes. It's the fact that like the numbers on a screen don't just like flick to the next one; they might like tick to the next one, or little UI elements will slide out directly anchored from the point of a certain object, or UI elements in the scene will sort of follow the target, but they'll follow it using something like smooth damp, so it has a nice rotation to the target. So these kinds of things are like, the way I would do it is I would want to lean fully into using all of the correct tweens and the correct approaches to doing stuff. And I kind of feel it would be unfair if I do that for my demo and then release it, and it's just like canvases turn on and off, and it just doesn't quite have the same sort of look to it. So I kind of feel like maybe I'll do 2 versions. Maybe I'll have one where it turns on and off, and then one which is like, you kind of realistically, if you put in DoTween, you'll do it this way. So I don't know. Again, we've literally worked on a few hours on this. It's been a side project for now, but we definitely think there's a market for it in terms of I would have wanted it when I was starting out. So I kind of feel like a good example of how to do things like a UI that's connected to a weapon in world space, that's correctly placed, that's toggleable, that uses, you know, all of the various tools for that, how to have like color changing materials that are correctly using property blocks and are not causing performance issues, or all these other little touches are something we do want to cover. And so, like I said, it hits a point you're just making a game, right? And if you're making a game, like how much of that are you selling? So the truth is, I kind of want to keep the scope of the project bit short, but have the environment demonstrated in a game universe. And if people like more of it, I don't see why I couldn't say, hey, if you like the level design-y stuff or you like the UI stuff, I could branch off and make a much more robust UI package and then make that a second thing. But I think it's more of a touchstone of this is the gun portion is one you probably want the most, and here's a bit of sort of shininess around it.
I feel that a lot of people would, I think, benefit from seeing that final product, I suppose, and then learning how to do it. You talk about DoTween and saying, okay, well, I use DoTween to do X, Y, Z. But you can do that too. This is how, and explaining to people how to use DoTween might not be the easiest task in the world, and it opens up a whole slew of potential bug reports or negative reviews if people think that somehow doesn't work because they can't get DoTween to work or something like that. So maybe a separate package in that regard is nice, where you sell this is the finished thing, also the instructions on how to do it yourself if you just want to learn how to do it yourself. But I think a lot of people would appreciate that, because there is the sense, there's a lot of stuff you can buy or just get, or you order from an artist to have made, and it's really great, but then you have to implement it, and that means you have to learn how to implement it, which is a whole another skill set. And there's a lot.
Well, that's why I'll say one thing I guarantee will provide, because this drives me insane with assets, is when you get a really great asset, like a character, and it's got all these animations, and they either don't provide any animator controller at all, so the animations are useless until you have to go through the laborious process of tying it all together, and you don't know how long the frames or the individual blends are like, so you have to play with it to figure out, oh, this is meant to continue, well, this one is meant to cut short, and it's like, you made these. You've obviously tested this yourself. Just give me the controller. It's not like it's something that costs you more effort to make. And so, not only will any gun we make have an animated controller, I will write a script that has all of the variables set up with it, with flags, and you will be able to say gun.reload, gun.open, because there'll be like open and closed modes, or various, or gun.shoot, and it'll call the correctly ID'd cached value for that particular animator to then animate the thing. Because at a base level, you should be able to say drop weapon in scene, call shoot, call reload, and it'll just do the animations. They'll smoothly animate between each other. And whether you tie that to actual particles or effects or whatever is secondary. But I really hate when you're given an asset and it doesn't animate, and that's the point of you getting the damn thing in the first place.
Yeah.
You had to add in some reload speed control too, adjust the speed of the animation.
Oh yeah, the animation multiplier that lets you dial how long or slow that takes.
Yeah, so that'd be one of the things. The other thing, I think, when I remember buying a lot of gun packs, getting really excited over the different variation in guns, when I didn't really know exactly how I would make a bunch of different guns, like having pistols and then having shotguns that do like a spread shot, and seeing like how that code is a little bit different, or flamethrower that literally, I think the first one shot out particles and used particle collisions, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I hadn't thought of that at the time, and I was like, I didn't even realize that was like a pattern I could have considered. So having a variety of things that do damage in different ways, or shoot out like a liquid, or things that are reasonable. A liquid one might be a little bit much, but just trying different things would be kind of cool too. Or like shooting out projectiles like grenades that just bounce. Different types of guns, I think it comes in really handy, because people get excited. They're like, oh, I want to try it, and I'll buy the pack because it has this type of gun. I mean, I bought one specifically because they had a minigun, or specifically because they had a flamethrower. Like, oh yeah, like I'll buy this $200 gun pack. We're gonna use this one for sure, and maybe the others.
I did something similar for one gun pack, which had like mini rockets. They just fired mini heat-seeking rockets, and I was like, that's cool. I want that. Again, it's not the code I couldn't write, but they'd done it well, and it looked satisfying, and I wanted that one. Turns out I didn't like how they coded it. Right? Yeah, but so it is a struggle, and I do think from a development perspective, once you've got a system that on trigger activates code that happens to do something, and then versions of that are an instantiator or a raycaster or whatever, it's actually pretty easy. Like I don't think a lot of people realize that from a mechanical perspective, if you've made a gun that reloads and shoots, you can make, say there's like an alternate fire that fires grenades. If you want sticky grenades versus bouncy grenades versus whatever, it's just a prefab being spawned, and whether or not it has a bounce material on it, or whether or not it has a timer and then it kills itself, or whether or not it sticks to, when it hits, it turns off its collider or whatever. Like, the actual technology for making individual cool bombs or bullets kind of boils down to, once you have it working, it's just playing around with a couple of settings. Now, art passes and making it look good and all that stuff is separate. But mechanically, like, exactly what I plan to do is, once I have stuff working, I'm just going to make like 40 cool things and see what I like. And then whichever ones I think would inspire me, I will then turn to the artist and say, make it look good. And then we'll put that for sale.
We need a red one and a green one and a blue one. Yeah.
That's a really good argument in my mind for a second package that decouples the weapons themselves from the things that they shoot. Because reality is, I mean, you show a gun, let's say you create a gun that shoots a grenade out. That, to you is going to look like a grenade launcher. To a lot of people, it's going to look like a grenade launcher. And if you see a grenade, you're going to be like, oh, it's a grenade launcher. But what if you add a blob of slime coming out of it, or a really thick plasma beam? And so the reality is, like, what somebody's going to use it for could be vastly different than what you intend. And so if you have now a separate package of particles with different ways of coding how they hit the the bad guys or whatever. It could be a really powerful method for allowing people to more easily customize the weapons to a game style that they're looking to achieve, without holding them into what you thought it was going to be.
That is always a struggle as a system designer, is that when I design something, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I've made a thing that will fire a strategy, whatever strategy you want. And in my mind, I know that to be whether you want this to be a targeter for space laser, or you want it to be a shotgun, or you want it to be a rocket launcher, or you want to fire bouncy bullets. To me, that's just the like plug in the bit at the end, which does the bit you want. And so to me, I don't see that as a particularly different or impressive change, because to me, it's like, I'll just make whatever plugin and attach it at that point to the code. But again, I fully understand also as a consumer, if I turn off the developer brain, that as a consumer, I look at it and go, I see the thing on screen and I want the thing on screen. And so I think you're right. I think just because I will, for my own sake, be designing systems that will support modular firing mechanisms versus fire rates, so you could take any bullet and provide any fire interval and then put it through any level of spread multiplier or whatever. To me, I see that as just infinite modularity, and you can do what you like with, but that may not come across conceptually unless you literally demonstrate a bunch of different variants of it. So that might be a good idea. I've seen a few asset packs do things where they have like a secondary plugin saying 15 more new guns, and it's just using your own tools pre-configured to various different setups that show you the power of what you can do with it. So that might be a fun thing down the line to just sort of say, here's your blob gun, here's your shotgun and rocket launcher, and here's one which fires like heat-seeking missiles, or here's one that lets you draw beams in the air that are like lasers or something. You can do all sorts of whatever you want.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, honestly, this idea is kind of what I wish a lot more of the assets on the asset store would do, is the idea of, hey, if you put out a gun pack, can somebody who's really good at particles then create a particle pack that is itself just a standalone pack, but is also meant to work with your gun pack really well, to the point where people wouldn't know that they're made by different designers, different artists, different developers. And then somebody would be like, oh, wow, those are really cool. I can make audio. So I'm going to make audio that works, again, standalone. You can use it in anything, but it also is tied directly to these. So now if you get these other packs, now you've got audio that's like, perfect for it and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite examples of this is I early in my kind of start with Unity, I used a lot of Master Audio. Master Audio is great. Out of the box, it kind of added all the features Unity didn't have. Now, Unity has a lot more of them now that it has its own audio mixer, but back in the day, it didn't have all the audio mixing. And so Master Audio did all of the stuff like that you'd expect. It still has features Unity doesn't at the moment, but these days I lean more to Fmod when I'm doing larger projects. But anyway, I used to use Master Audio a lot, and then I came across my favorite asset at the time, Choreographer. Choreographer lets you beat stuff to music and do all sorts of fun rhythm-based things. And it's like, I've got these two separate systems. How do I? And then I opened up Choreographer, and there's like, oh, just click this button and install this script, and then drag this on here, and it works with Master Audio. I'm like, oh, well, that's nice. It's just a nice thing. I don't have to go down this rabbit hole of using it, because they have this whole thing called visors and other stuff, and it's like, there's a nice interconnected system for that. It knows how it works together, and I've always appreciated that. I think more developers should reach out to neighboring developer assets and go, it benefits us both if we can cross-promote this and help everyone make things together,
Yeah.
Have you considered making it work with Playmaker?
I could. I guess the thing is, maybe it's just a bit of a pride thing, but for me, I think it's hubris for me to go out the gate and then try to like connect to everyone else's systems until I make it, see if it's a valid thing worth doing, and then if I see people are engaging with it, that it's worth then taking the time to make a Playmaker integration. Because when I do, I will reach out and I will say, hey, by the way, I'm making a thing that connects to your thing, because I think it's a respectful thing to do. So I will probably do a scrub on the asset store if people like the assets and say, what would I want to integrate this with? Like, ooh, is that a nice particle system? Can I do something? Can I somehow ease the process between any of these other assets that I would want to try it with? But again, I kind of want to wait until I have something that I would want to get myself before I would go down the rabbit hole of trying to integrate with things.
Oh yeah, definitely. You want to get it out there and get it good before you got to have some demand for it before there's a reason to integrate it with other things, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely the kind of thing that people that are using Playmaker or Bolt or some visual scripting would probably enjoy too, because it's just an easy system. It's the kind of thing that, like you said, you want right when you start using Unity. It's one of the first things that you want to grab is some sort of a weapon system, or at least the first things most of us want to grab because we want to make little shooter games, whether it's first person or top down or whatever.
If you're making it first person shooter, you need something that shoots.
Yeah.
And that means you also need a character controller. I was going to ask you, Jason, are you going to include in your demo scene?
Unity's first person. I am not making a custom character controller. No chance. Because again, we come back to the problem that if it was me in my project, I'll be using my favorite character controller, kinematic character controller, and I don't want to I don't want to include that or go down the rabbit hole of making a bunch of plugins for it. That's what I would do in my project, but I still want to give people an engaging experience. So you're going to get the Unity sample first person one, which is pretty good. I'll configure it a way that I like, which is sort of slightly slower and a slightly slower rotation, slightly faster movement. Add a few different things for there's some edge detection stuff that's missing on that one that I might drop in to make it a bit more comfortable. But I will mostly use their one and drop a few things on it. Actually, one thing that is confusing me, what I should or shouldn't do, is there is different ways to make the gun feel good depending on the render path you're choosing. So Unity actually did a video about this very recently, which is the old way of handling cameras with guns is realistically you'd render the gun twice, right? You'd have the camera render the gun, you'd cull everything else, and you have another camera render the scene without the gun, you'd layer one on top of the other, and that way you can have a wide FOV for the character, a short FOV for the gun, overlay it over everything else, and the gun isn't going to clip into geometry as you walk around. That was the classic way to do it, but has the downsides of double cameras. Now, the newer way with the customizable render pipeline is you can literally have render passes. You can control the render passes, and you can do it more efficiently. So I could do it either way, but if I do it the UDP route, then it'll be the better way to do it, the more recommended way. But now people would kind of have to be using UDP for that demo scene. And now we're back to the problem of you're kind of gating your audience a bit. So it's a bit tough trying to choose where you're going. Because to me, if I'm prototyping, I kind of want the least sort of the least amount of requirements for my tests. I want to drop a thing in, press play, see if I like it, and if there's a path to bring it into a larger project, it's there. But I don't like when you download a project, they're like, oh, you must be in UDP, or you must have this, you must have these things, you must have these settings, whatever, the lighting type must be in linear. It's like, that's probably how I would really do it. But if I want to just make a box with ProBuilder, drop it in, and see if I like it, I don't know. So it is a struggle. Like it's because, and to be honest too, it's all work I have to do. It doesn't come for free. I have to decide people go, oh, just make both. Well, yeah, but how many just make boths are there? Just make both scenes, just make both environments, just make both render passes, just make both. All of a sudden, it's like at this stage, like to recoup the cost, it already won't recoup the cost for less than hundreds of people buying it. If I do all of that, you're looking at how many people are required just to get to the point it's worth the time investment. So
and then
you have to make cuts somewhere.
All that. I mean, that's what it also comes down to. And I think this is a struggle for a lot of people making stuff for the asset store. There are so many ways of doing very common things of integration. Essentially, it's integration, I suppose. There's a lot of ways to integrate guns into an FPS. And there are some ways that are better than others. There's some considerations. If you're doing for this, you need to do this. Or if you're doing it for a different thing, VR, then maybe you have a completely different use case. And at what point does it become overburdened really for the provider of the asset itself to know all the different use cases, know how to do it, and provide that information to people who a lot of users are more new, which is great because it means we've got more people making games and stuff, but it means that people are still learning. So there's a lot they don't know about how to do different things. And so, you get into an issue where if you go the route that, doesn't use the UDP, then all of a sudden, you're providing what you consider to be the worst way of doing it, but it's also the more upfront, easy way because it's just everyone can do it. And so are you, on one hand, you're making a more flexible system because you're not telling people they have to do a certain thing, which is great. But the other hand, for a lot of people, they might not even know that what they're getting and what they think might be the way to do it is not necessarily the way to do it. Not because it's a bad way, but because there could be different ways. And it gets into this question of where do you draw that line between what I'm providing, what I know it can do, and where do I want to take people to before I stop and say you're on your own,
100%. And again, like, so what Corey said there is ease of use over fancy to start. Well, again, we're not really talking about shininess here. We're talking about the old best practices for Unity, or the old standard way to do things was a different input system, a different UI system, and a different rendering pipeline. The new going forward standards are UDP, the new input system, and soon to be the new UI system. And it's less about being simple or fancy. It's more about the question of, do I support what people are doing now, what the most amount of resources are now, or do I look into the fact that, as we've all seen, a lot of assets are on the asset store now being defunct because they're from old technologies. And that's probably a good thing. You don't want to be pulling in a Unity 4 old asset and having it break everything that you're doing. But at the same time, if I was to go and make something that supports what the current standards are, I'm signing up for 6 months down the line, redoing all of that work again to support the new standards? Or do I bite the bullet and say, look, you have to know Unity enough to be able to follow along with all of their most recent tutorials and guides? This isn't shiny new stuff. This is, you just need to know the new input system and you need to know the new render pipeline. If you know those two things, just the basics of them, you can use this to its full extent. And that frees me up to make stuff that uses those systems to the best of their ability and has extra features. Alternatively, I would have to cut half the features, make a poorer product, put it out there so it's easier to use, but then at the same time, I will have more work to do to update it later. So it's not about fancy, it's about pragmatic. Who's it for? Is it for absolute beginners, or is it for someone further along? And if it's for absolute beginners, to be honest, should I really be marketing a complex, like, multi-layered coding system with all of these different features to absolute beginners? Like, they're going to ask questions that realistically will take up more time to manage. Like, how do I shoot? How do I reload? It's like the same way you would in any other code base. Like, I don't have time to hire a team to manage entire fields of questions of that. So it almost feels like I have to, by design, skip over the absolute beginners and move to people who have at least 6 months experience. But again, the people who are new are the ones most excited to buy the new assets. And so it's a struggle.
It's a struggle. I find it helpful to tell people, at least with the one scripting asset I have, the game modules, to put in the description, you need intermediate coding experience. If you don't have intermediate coding knowledge, this probably won't be for you. For that exact reason. It's not for brand new folks. It's not complicated. It just means if you the number of times I've had people ask, how do you make a prefab? Illustrates that there's a lot of very new people out there who are on their first couple months of using Unity and are still learning. And I'm happy to provide them with the best assets. But, that does take up some time to say, just drag it into the project view.
Yeah, I think you should probably focus on the simpler stuff, to be honest. And there are really a couple of reasons. First is, like, with the new systems coming out and replacing things, you said in 6 months, I feel like that's extremely optimistic. People have been telling me that the input system and UI system and everything else were going to get swapped out for years. And I still don't expect people to even start doing a lot of new I don't expect 50% of new projects to use them anytime soon still. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
The problem is, though, but that's what I would use. That's the problem, is right. Is the code I'm giving just an example of
stuff? It's not what most of the people buying the asset would use, and it's not what the people that already have their projects going and want to get a gun set and drop it in are going to use. So I would go with what they're more likely to use, and the people that are going to use the newer things and are on that edge, they're not going to have that hard of a time upgrading it and swapping it. And when it comes to, like, the performance and URP stuff, you're really, I think, at that point trying to solve a problem that most of them don't have. Maybe 1 out of 100 people is going to be hitting this performance issue where they need to do it the optimal way, and they're already at that point. They're not the guy that's buying your gun pack and trying to integrate it for performance. Like, people are buying it because they don't know how to build the system, or they really like the art and the integrations, not because, like, they think that they're going to learn how to make, like, the most optimal FPS or how to get the best performance out of it. So I would I think, leave that to them to find on their own. And, maybe you can make a blog post about it and link to it and talk about it there. but I wouldn't put that in there as like a thing, because you really are probably just going to catch a lot of people and just confuse them. And then you're going to get a lot of support questions about stuff that aren't really core to your asset, about like, how do the input system changed? How do I change this? Or how do I make a new profile? They just modified the system and moved it again. Like, how do I do this with URP? How do I upgrade my whole project to URP? I just did that so that I could get this performance. Now the whole thing's broken. And I think it's just, you want to solve that problem that they have of like, I want cool guns, I want them in the game, and I want to be able to integrate them easily into my existing project, which is what most people want. Like, they've got a game, they've got something in mind, they're going to be able to drop it in without making too many changes. And that's probably where I'd focus, and then put the rest of the stuff externally in some blog posts or Git posts or something, or like a GitHub repo, or even an external samples package if you wanted to support it. But I wouldn't focus on it, because I think it'll be a big distraction from the core thing you want to do, and it'll probably take twice as long to add in all the best practice stuff and do it perfectly.
That is fair. I guess I'm kind of worried from an empathetic perspective. I agree, and you're probably right, and it's probably the way I'll go, just because, to be honest, it is about making an asset to fund life. Like, there's a reason why you're doing it. It's not just to be polite all of the time. And so that's the practical approach. But I guess part of me is thinking, as myself, as a content consumer, I always wanted to look at assets that look good as an example of, okay, these people look like they know what they're doing. I assume by getting this pack or this project, I'm getting an insight into some possible design choices that they made that indicate good practices or how people should approach these things. And oftentimes that's not the case, right? Like, you get a really nice looking asset and there's like 12 get component calls in an update loop, and you're just like, oh no, I can't. Now I know that's not good, so I can look at it and go, okay, note to self, take the assets, don't take the code. But I get a bit squirrely when I'm thinking I'm actively making decisions for worse. And I'm not talking about like micro optimizations. I just mean I wouldn't even approach it this way. I would approach it using a different thing, and I'm actively putting out an asset that doesn't have the things I would do, because it's then setting that precedent that, oh, this must be the right way to do it. It's like, well, it's not. It's the way that will get you started quickest, but it's not the way I would do it.
It's the least opinionated way to do it, right? Is what you really want to aim for. Because and I think the difference is, if you were building a first-person shooter kit, like, here's a first-person shooter. This is like the start to end of a first-person shooter. You've got enemies, you're running around, and like, this is the game loop, and you're doing that. In that case, I would be more inclined to push towards like the opinionated, do it the right way, perfect way. But if it's just, when I think of a gun asset and a weapon asset, I think of something that I want to be able to, like, I have a game, I've got shooting in there already, I want to be able to pull it in and kind of integrate it. And I think along the way, it was always like that. If I pulled in multiple gun packs, I don't want them to not work together, or to have to do a whole bunch of work to make it so that they work together, and to be able to just kind of have everything kind of magically work and not have it be too opinionated. But if it was a full-on like shooter pack, then I would expect it to be very opinionated on that stuff and give me the better practices. So I guess
that's fair. And I'm definitely avoiding that.
Where you want to be on that. Like, do you want to be the full shooter that's the ideal optimal, or do you just want to be the easy to slap in gun pack that's pretty extensive? It just kind of works anywhere. And
I definitely don't want that, because as the keyword you've said right there is opinionated. I hate opinionated systems, because oftentimes 70% of your workflow, you already know what you're doing. You just want to bring something in, and at least to start, get it to work with what you've got. And then if you like their workflow better, you might pivot towards it. And this is kind of why I stopped using Doozy UI, right? Doozy 2 was this nice, I could drop it in and start working with it. Doozy 3, like, you kind of have to use all their stuff. And after that, it's sort of like, this is too opinionated for me now. I can't use the bits I like and not the bits I don't. And it just sort of, it killed my enthusiasm for that asset. So I definitely don't want to lean down the road of saying, here is a weapon system with modular plugins for all the different parts. Some people like that because they want to have a basically build your own game with blocks. But in my case, I want to say, whatever character controller you're using, drop a gun under it, and here is a input script that will make it fire. But if you want to, just literally turn that off and put your own one on it. And that way, everything's up to you from that point. So I think begrudgingly, I just have to accept that it has to be the lowest common denominator for this stuff. And then if I have time, I can make a shinier one that will be for the demo. And then possibly if I can modularize some of that, maybe release it. But the truth is, it probably has to be two separate things. It has to be the shiny demo video and then the practical tools. And I think what might be, I might go down the road of doing blog posts that might describe why I would go one way or another, or some of the caveats that I would change. But hey, that being said, like it's not like I'm not like I'm aiming to make a bad version, right? It's just things, any optimization I can make that is sensible, I'll do. It's just there's a point of as you were saying, Andrew, there's a point where it's confusing the people who are new versus confusing the people who are more experienced. Like there's a whole load of fancy programming stuff that I will want to use that I will actively avoid because it wouldn't be sensible for somebody learning, even if unless you had 5 years programming experience, you're not going to know how to use some of these particular nuanced things that I've been using for a while. So I will try to match those levels. It's just, yeah. I guess we're going for the drop-in solution then. Fine, you've sold me.
The other thing I would recommend too is do some documentation along the way that you make public. So one of the things I did in my kit was I put up a web page that just has videos where I literally went through every line of code. I explained how every class works, why it works that way, and how it works. So that way, every time I got a question about something, I'd say, "Here's the video explaining exactly it. Let me know, if you go through this, and if you still have questions, it'll help a lot." And I found that my support requests were really, really low because of that. And like 9 out of 10, I could just send right over to that, have them watch the video and understand what it was, or at least get all of the things that I was going to tell them if I tried to explain it to them. And I feel like I don't know how much support is on the asset store, but I get the sense that it could be overwhelming if you have a code asset that's popular and people get confused a lot. So I wanted to really try to minimize that from the start, and I would recommend doing something similar.
And what's funny about this too is, from my perspective, I want to be very clear. When I put the asset up, it will be code. It will be my code. I will put a lot of pride in my code, but it is not a code asset. And I want that to be hyper clear. It is the code required to make the weapons cool and work and fun. But I will not be there adding features as an option. It's like, hey, how do I add this feature? Like, if you want to write your own system, or you have the source code, you can play with it. I will document things. I'll show you how it works. But I won't be fielding answers to how or why on very particular things, because it'll be very clearly demarcated as you're getting cool guns with some buttons that make them animate. The other stuff is like, I put it in because I would have wanted it, as an example. Shiny UIs and all the animated stuff and all the fancy stuff. But like, again, if I wanted to sell that as an asset, it would be a much more expensive separate product that I would sell, and then I would offer support and modular plugins and all that stuff. But like, let's start with just make the guns shoot, and then we can come back to all of this stuff later.
You may not be fielding the answers, but I have a feeling there will be questions. Because that,
yes, I saw you smiling. It's like, yeah, he has no idea. He's going to get tons of questions about this. Yeah, and I know. It's coming.
Yeah, but I mean that's okay, because if you are upfront about it and in the description saying, hey, the demo scene does all these things, you can learn from it. I'm not going to support that because the demo scene is for demo purposes. And I do this, I face this with my characters all the time. My demo scene is bare bones. It gets the character to move so you can click buttons. A long time ago, I had a button that, you could customize it in the editor with sliders. Now, this is something you'd usually do in the inspector with all the blend shapes to make the body bigger or smaller or whatnot. That's something you do in the inspector, but I put it in the demo scene, so now there's sliders. It was a mistake, because now a lot of people were like, oh, that's cool. How do I save that, though? And they weren't realizing that it was in the inspectors where you really do it, not in the demo scene. And so now I was getting a support request, and I still get some from time to time, about how do you save a prefab from the demo scene? Because for a short while, I had a button that let you save the prefab at runtime, which was just some code. I mean, it was just code, whatever it was. But people suddenly started asking about that. I was like, I should never have included that in the demo scene, because now I'm spending my time supporting people on something that they really shouldn't be doing in the first place. And if they really need to save prefabs at runtime, which you shouldn't, that's not a thing that you need to do in your final game, then that's something you should probably just learn how to do yourself. I mean, that's really specific. And I know for a fact there are other publishers of art, characters, etc., who specifically will never include a demo scene because they do not want to support any coding. because they are not themselves coders. They can do a bare bones, this is what it looks like when it moves, but instead they'll make videos showing what it moves like in a completely different system, maybe even not even in Unity, so that people can see how it moves. But once they get it, all they're getting is characters, textures, animations. And they have to do the animated controller you mentioned earlier, that you don't like it when there's no animated controller. But even that gets to a point where, you know, even for my animator controllers, they are bare bones. There's a start and a locomotion loop, and then a whole bunch of individuals that generally will go back to the locomotion loop, but it's not a robust controller. So I hope that people, and I have a feeling most don't, but I hope that when people get this, they figure, okay, that's a cool demo controller, but I need to make my own because my game is going to be XYZ and the enemies have to move in this different way or have to respond or whatever it might be. But I'm sure people just drag and drop.
It's funny because that's so relatable in more than just this case, because I work on client projects, and a while back, I made a client project that I showed to the clients. They're like, oh, cool, that works. And what I did is I built like a modular menu system that dynamically built menu items. And I built it for me because I know changes are coming. And I wanted to build something that let me quickly modify and change things so that if it comes up, it only takes me a few minutes. I don't have to drag items in the UI. And I made the mistake of showing them, because then they're like, oh my God, this opens so many opportunities. We can do all of this stuff. And it's like, well, hang on. This is a tool I made for me to make your requirements faster. This isn't like a feature we're adding to anything. Just you know. And then it's like, I know you're saying that, but we can do that. And it's like, okay, so I know I shot myself in the foot by doing that, because I kind of opened up doors of ideas that, while it's always good to have and it's always good to provide options, it kind of worries the milestones and, you know, the feature creep at that stage, because you're sort of, it also sets a precedent that this will happen every time. And it's like, well, no, this is just this particular instance. It made more sense for me not to make the one-time thing, but to understand what's changing and to make something modular that is more than you've asked for. But I didn't make it for you. I made it for me to answer your future questions, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, it's a struggle. It follows the same thing of, it's funny how you have to sometimes be careful what you show as a product. Like, it might actually have more features or more power than you're saying, but you don't really think about the fact that you have to stop carefully and only explain what's relevant, because you're going to fall into these traps.
Yep. Yeah. I feel this is one of those places where there's a weird middle ground between that, exactly what we were just talking about, and the exact opposite, where you create something that is insanely powerful or very flexible and can be used in so many different ways. If you just use your imagination, you understand the system, use your imagination, and suddenly you can take something that was meant to be, just as a weird analogy, this was meant to be a can of soda, but now I can make it into a grenade. You know, just a few different things, just a tweak here, and now it's in a grenade. It used to be a soda can, now it's a grenade. Or a more, maybe a better example would be, for those who have been around for a while, remember the Neon demo that Unity made. There was one part in that in particular, it's a very dystopian sci-fi scene, but the camera focuses on this toy car on a trash heap. And it's this one moment that it just focuses, it's just in the middle, but that toy car on the asset store is this tune car that they got. It was a free tune car, and they shrunk it down to this big and they put it on a trash heap. Now it's a toy car. And, you know, it's that type of thing, but take that into a scripting, some sort of coding system that by itself might look like, well, what does this do? It does
I have a perfect example of this. Perfect example. Yeah. So if you pull that up, Jason, this was an example of some of the scripts that I did for that asset that I put on the store that got declined because it wasn't well documented or explained. And so, and I now, in retrospect, I fully understand why. This isn't very visually appealing or understandable as to what it's for. But this is basically me demonstrating a bunch of stuff. There's a little bottom right. There's a little, if you hover over the image, there should be, on the bottom right of the image, there'll be a little thing there. Does that not work? Oh, no, okay.
No, not when it's shared. It acts weird when it's shared.
That's strange. Either way, yeah.
So my window down and get rid of that.
My point is basically what it does is it lets you pick a shape, whether it's a primitive or a custom shape of yours or whatever. It lets you pick a point generator, so spheres or circles or whatever shape you want, choose the fill percentage of that shape, and then distribute those objects in space towards those points. So you can like make shapes out of subshapes, and then you can sort of distribute and link them so you can have things move along. Now, like I said, this isn't very visually understandable or appealing as to why this exists. And I'll show you one more example of it, and then I'll show you what I did with it as like in my mind going, yeah, you can do stuff like this. So this is the second one. So these two GIFs just are like, this is a tool I wanted for myself. And like I said, I put it on the store and it didn't quite gel with people because it was hard to figure out what the point of something like this was. In this case, I'm just demonstrating how there's different types of providers. So this case, there's a line. I don't know, is that playing? Should be.
It's not animated.
That one should be.
Oh, there it goes. I had to click on it.
Yeah. So there we go. It's like I picked a line, I lock the items to the line, I can distribute it, I can change it from a line to a circle, and you can see like you can just distribute things in space because I found it quite useful to do that. So with all of that, I went and I wanted to demonstrate, because I was in a different conversation with somebody else, unrelated to the asset, like a year later, someone was bringing up something, and I made a quick example using my own code to do it, which was using that, and it occurred to me, I never once demonstrated the two. It's like, why would that thing relate to this thing? So let me pull up I've shown you this before, but it sort of highlights that point now, I think. Where is this GIF?
Pulling up link number 3.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that third one. Where's the...
All right. When you guys were talking about this, though, it just reminded me of Salim the whole time, because I got to get him back in here soon. Every time with like game systems and code stuff, you'd always find like crazy ways to turn a system into doing something completely different and building like these advanced complex systems on top of something that's like supposed to keep track of how many apples you picked up or some crap. Pick like the simplest thing and like build this big giant complex architecture and infrastructure on top of it. It's nuts.
So this is an example of what I kind of made with it. Now, to me, it's the same thing. It's just putting some points in space. Only now I'm using it to do telekinesis. But to me, it was like, well, that's just an implementation of it. Like, that's just, you fly the objects into place and whatever. But the hard part is this consistently updating set of positional points in space that do all of this fun stuff. And like, yeah, again, I never took the time to demonstrate how to like do these things, like interpolating the shapes. And now what's really cool is at some point I'll switch. I'm using a circle point generator. If I switch now to a sphere, they're all sphere shaped. And that looks really cool, but you just saw me do it. It's just switching between a point generator of type circle or sphere. And to me, I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is what it does. But yeah, I never took the time to demonstrate this by just showing some dots in a little GIF. And so lesson learned, you have to demonstrate the value of something like that.
Yeah. So now here's the paradox of the asset store. This would sell. You put particles on this, and people would buy this as a telekinesis thing, even though you built a very robust, flexible system that can do this, but UI, and I mean, there's so many things you could do with that system, obviously. But people will say, I want that telekinesis thing, and I'll pay top dollar for it. But all this other thing that basically does this and way much more, I don't get it. I don't want to buy that. But this though, and that's the problem. Like the more powerful something is, in some ways, I guess the harder it is to show how powerful it is. Because it's going to be more abstract in many ways. I mean, even something like Playmaker, we all understand the power of visual scripting now, but if you tell someone, oh, I made a thing where you can just make nodes and code with nodes, and you don't, just the bare bones of what Playmaker is without showing all these other steps, people might be like, I can just code myself. Why would I need that? But then see the use cases, get those balls rolling in your head, all of a sudden it like, oh, wait, I can do that. And I can do this other thing, and it's easy. Now I'm starting to understand the power. But yeah, I'd buy that.
Yeah, I think you should make telekinesis back now.
Yeah.
I think it's
well,
cool.
actually, I could just make the guns have a type of bullet thing that has a collection of spheres that fire or something. You can do all sorts of stuff.
The telekinesis gun.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you can make an alt version of your guns with for fantasy with magic and stuff. So now there can be a fantasy FPS as well.
Or
I will say though that
2 packs and integrate them. Look at this. The gun pack integrates with the telekinesis pack, and you can make a telekinesis gun. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good idea.
That way your telekinesis thing can be less opinionated, and it doesn't have to be revolved around specific sci-fi guns, and it could be anything, but you can also have an example showing how you integrate it with another system.
I mean, certainly, like now I'm envisioning a giant like portal or a big pedestal or an obelisk in a game with these slowly moving orbs around it. That maybe it's just visual in the environment, but I can't do that easily. But if I had this,
well, actually, the way I originally the original demo I did for myself, the reason I made this is I had this cool thing where there's like a room you're in, and you can point your gun at the wall, and you can press a button, and what it would do is it would rip the tiles off the wall, and the tiles would fly towards your gun and make a sphere over your gun, and then you could shoot the tiles. And so that's what they originally made it for my own little project. And so it had that whole and when you press the button, it would shoot the tiles and they'd launch back to their original position. So you could have this like bundle of 50 tiles, and then you could press a button and they would just like fly off and then rebuild walls. And I was doing the same for platforms. So you could suck up a platform, shoot it, press a button, the platform would fly back in position, you could jump over it and whatever. So this is what I was using it for in my original thing. But yeah, it's funny. Like I will fully own the fact, and this comes down to experience, and we say it all the time, is you learn as you go. Like at the time, I may have been fine at programming, but I didn't understand clients or people or how to manage that until this was like 8 years ago or something when I first made that. That was a long time ago. And so I've learned a lot since then about the differences between expectations. Now, I uploaded it recently because I had it on Reddit, and then I couldn't find it every time people asked for a reference to it, so I moved it. But yeah, the point is that I've now learned the difference between what code can do and an expectation for what it can do visually. And so you're 100% right, is that you need to learn how to effectively market your stuff, even if it's not physically marketing it as like a product, but marketing it as a concept or an idea. You have to sell why people care. And that's why I've said this all of the time when people are like, how do I convince my manager to let me write unit tests or whatever? It's like, well, you can't. You don't convince them. You sell them. You give them a reason why it's valuable for them that you do unit tests. In the same way I've learned, like I can give people powerful code, but if they can't use it, then it's not powerful code. It's just trash, right? It's the whole point is unless it does something for them, and I have to demonstrate what it can do for them. So that's why I was so kind of learning my lesson, maybe overcorrecting why I want to do it the fancy way for the gun asset, because I'm looking at it going, this is what you can do with it if you put like everything into it. But as you said, that's probably too much overcorrection for this. There needs to be this balance of what you can use without, requiring you to have 5 years of experience working on just this one thing.
Yeah, you're like the exact opposite of what you did with the telekinesis, right?
Yeah.
There are people asking though where they can get this thing. Is this something you ever made publicly available?
No. I have the code somewhere in like a little package of a Unity package I put somewhere, but it never went anywhere because I was pretty disheartened after my second attempt putting it in the store, and it's like, it doesn't look good. It's like, okay, fine, because it was, to me, I just used gizmos and spheres to demonstrate it, and again, looking at it now, like it doesn't look very good. But then again, there's a lot of not looking good assets on the store at the time. I kind of thought mine would have been fine to fit along there, but no. So I don't know. It's, you know what? Some version of this code will probably end up in the gun asset at some stage, because I do think having things that can like orbit around, or have a gun that lets you target something and then a sphere of drones flies overhead and shoots down on them or something, that's surprisingly easy once you've got the rest of the pieces in place. So I might make some wacky gun modes and things. So we'll see.
Yeah, your suction gun seems cool too. Just being able to suck things up. I mean, even if it's just blocks, like you put a tag or a script on a block and you can suck it up and then have it circle around and then shoot them back out. It'd be like a really neat one. It'd be one of those ones that'd be kind of cool to show off, right? Like it would look really neat in a video and fancy. Probably not too much.
Yeah, and I've said this to people before that I highly recommend whenever you're doing anything in Unity stuff, save yourself a little GIF. Like it helps you with reasoning out ideas and things. And just to show you that I do this all the time, here's just a bunch of things that I've made that kind of whenever I have an idea that sparks some inspiration, I usually try to keep some reference to what it is or what it's doing. And so I recommend people do that, because you'll come up with connections and ideas at some stage. Oh, and it's funny because we were talking about doors earlier and how do you make a door system, Andrew, whatever. Here's a door system that I made for myself that never went anywhere either. Oh, wrong chat. Here's that one.
That's not a door system, Jason. Where'd it go? There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pull this up and share it.
But that wasn't being made to make a door system. The point of that is I was learning how to do custom editor inspectors, and I thought a fun example would be to make some doors and things with it.
All right. Which one should I click on first?
Oh, just you can just see none. All of them are fine. Like just that view alone just shows them opening and closing. There's not really anything more than that. My point anyway is just that it is a bunch of doors and things that open and close that have different sort of UI things for them. It's just funny that it's
openable. Openable.
Yeah. The little icon. The little icon. If you look at the open and close, see the open sign on the door when it's open.
Oh, nice.
I was messing with editor stuff at that stage.
Playing with some custom inspectors there.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Nice. All right, I'll stop sharing for a minute.
Yeah, door systems are great. The reason I go to door systems a lot is because they're a very simple way to demonstrate complex ideas. Because a lot of the stuff I do ends up being education. I usually use it to teach a concept or something. And so you can use a door to teach command patterns and how to do various different mediator systems and how to control the animator and how to do so much stuff that when I'm looking for something really quick, doors are one of those things that if you're new to Unity can be a surprising amount of work. You're sitting there going, ugh, I just want to make a door I can open and close. And it's like, cool. So learn how triggers work, learn how animators work, learn how whatever. It's like, okay. And so oftentimes, and then that's not even like the way I would do it, because normally I would use DoTween again, or I'd use my own enumerator. I wouldn't use an animator for a door unless it was this ornate thing with 50 parts that does all of these cool individual things, because I like to be able to control the speed and the ease curve and all the other fun parts of that. So again, doors are like shorthand for me for let's talk about a complicated system. I also use remote controls because remote controls and doors are two things that are very easy to explain relative complex patterns with. I've actually shown you the remote control one before, haven't I, Jason? That's another one.
Yeah, that one's pretty good, where you send commands through the remote and then those get processed using the command pattern, right? I think it's a really good example of the command pattern in general.
Yeah, so I dropped that one in there as well. That's like, so this is just an example of, again, doors and remote controls are two things that make for really good educational fodder, effectively.
That's oh wait, where did it go? This one right here. Yeah. Just grab it with the remote and start moving things around. And then each remote click just sends a command that does something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to teach the command pattern, I think, because I mean it's easy to abstract away like the clicking on a button is a command and everything you do versus like holding down W for a second or a frame is a command. It gets a little bit more complex or something else going on.
And then you can highlight the fact that one of the biggest powers of using a command pattern is the undo. So now I'm going back and I'm pressing the bottom left button, which is undo, and it undoes whatever commands were previously sent to that object. And so it highlights that one of the benefits of commands is they're cacheable as a collection, and you can then redo and undo each command per item.
Yeah, and replay them too. A lot of time, I think people forget they can do that. You could go back and just replay all of your commands and replay your entire game state. A lot of time you set it up the right way. Nice. Well, should we jump over and start taking some questions? We've been talking about assets.
Yeah. I'm sure we missed a few. Yeah, while we were going off on.
So I guess if people have new questions, feel free to just drop them in, and we'll start watching for them now and kind of address them. I assume there's going to be quite a few people that have questions about assets or just general game development stuff. Before we do, though, make sure that if you haven't already hit the thumbs up button and shared the video, that you go do that real quick now while we wait for questions to pop in. Go like drop it up on Instagram and Facebook and all the other stuff. Be curious to see what this question. Hold on, sorry, getting distracted. Questions are popping in. You guys ready? I have no idea why. What is this? What just started playing randomly? All right, I'm gonna disable the screen share. There's another one. All right, so you guys ready for questions? Everybody already shared the video and stuff. Have any thoughts on Axie Infinity blockchain game that has exploded recently and has a play to earn structure? No, I have no thoughts on it. Have you heard of this one?
I looked into it briefly. It basically looks like this generation's Neopets, which I dig because I was a big Neopets fan as a kid. But other than that, it's technologically, I'm still staying madly clear of blockchain. I mean, I know it's powerful and it's going to become a huge big deal in the future, if it isn't already, if you count the financial effects of what it's doing. It's just nothing. I don't have interest in using it for games and things yet. I want to see what other people do first. There's other things I'm focused on.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. Like every time I've looked at it or somebody has tried to convince me, I've struggled to see where there was a benefit to the company or the place implementing it. Here, let me pull this thing up. Is this Axie Infinity? So I hadn't seen this before.
That's the one. Yeah.
Like, yeah, this thing. So yeah, I've never looked at it. Jesus, 300 Ethereum, whatever it is, they're making a ton of money, but I have no idea. Yeah, I always just worry about that stuff. Like, I've never found what the technological benefit is for them other than, like you've got this new technology and that's a great marketing thing. Outside of that, like nobody's ever been able to convince me of how it was going to help the game company do what it needed to do in an easier, safer way. Like you could do all of the things that they can do with blockchain, just keep it internally. You could even
exactly, yeah,
but
the ledger concept for security is fundamentally a benefit compared to standard currency solutions, right? There's a separate thing to that where it's got that trackable ledger. So that has, as you said, a very tangible benefit as to why you would use blockchain for that solution. But for a lot of the stuff for game things, like you said, it's like putting cloud on everything,
Yeah, it's the problem is that like it solves a problem, but it solves a problem that game developers don't generally have, which is like needing to track the transactions of everything in another system because they don't trust their logging enough to handle it, and needing like to have other people be able to verify and check it. I guess I don't know. Like a lot of it just seems like Like I do the same stuff in a database, or in any old traditional system. I mean, I'm sure there's some benefit, and somebody's going to come up with something crazy, and and then people are also just going to make money off of it because crypto's booming, and as it grows, like it's a new market.
That's the other thing too, right? It's already up till now, games have managed to skirt the legality questions around gambling and all the other stuff because it's not real money, right? As long as you are buying into currencies in game when you're using that different stuff, there's a nice level of separation, and it works for companies that want to separate you from the concept of your money. Once you buy 20 gems, you kind of forget that every time you spend a gem, it's worth $20 or whatever. Like you lose that mental connection, and it makes it very easy for game devs. And so I've always disliked the in-app purchasing model in general. I would rather pay more for a game once rather than go through that. Even double. I would pay double one time to be able to have an experience that's meant to be a good game and not meant to be a delivery mechanism for further purchases for me. And what worries me is it's one thing using blockchain as a concept in a game for various different uses that isn't financial, but when it comes to using cryptocurrency in games as an actual currency model, that worries me because we're getting into the territory now where we're removing that boundary of the digital currency to the real one. Now that might take a while because, like I said, there's legislation reasons why it benefits a company to keep that separation. But when they do finally bridge the gap and people are like, oh yeah, whatever, just everything can have currency, and suddenly the barriers are broken now, and companies will start being a little bit more on the nose with selling you stuff. And the whole point of games will be software as a service currency thing. And I just miss games where the point of the game was to be an experience. And I'm really worried that the further we go down this road of software services, like there's a reason why big giant MMOs treat you differently as a client, because what you're doing is they're trying to keep you hooked. They're like waving shiny things in front of you the whole time. Their strategy is different. They don't actually care about how good the game is. They care about whether you play it. And if you look into the marketing on this, there's a huge difference between a game being fun versus a game being engaging, right? There's like people that there are entire marketers that will market games as it is engaging, but people will hate playing it. It'll infuriate them, but they'll keep playing it because they're engaged in the process. And so the more we deal with money being a metric for driving your biases as a player, the more games care less about being fun and care more about engagement, and that starts to worry me. So I don't know. The more of this real world technologies we can sort of like sidestep away from games, I would sooner focus on let's make games better as a medium for delivering stories. That interests me more than anything else.
I mean that it becomes a dopamine delivery system, and all games are dopamine delivery systems. You know, Super Mario Brothers delivers dopamine, but the point wasn't to get. I guess actually, if we go back to the 80s, the point of original video games was to get you to put more quarters in, right? So the arcade version of the game was harder than the Nintendo version of the game because they had a different goal. Right, the producers of the game had a different goal in mind, and those arcade owners weren't going to buy a game if there weren't so many quarters per hour on the rating. You know, that's how they rated the marketability of these games. Today, that is more about in-app purchases and whether or not you know that 98% of your people who play this game will never buy a single thing. That's fine because all you care about is those 2%. And how much they buy and how long they buy. You know, what is your monthly active users? And that's the stats that you care about, not whether are people having fun? Will people pay $40 for this up front? No, you don't care because you care about the some people who get addicted to it and end up spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on this. And for me, the crypto games essentially changes that to now, as a player, am I playing it because I want to make this game fun, I'm enjoying myself, or am I playing it because I want to make a buck and buy a house? You know,
and if you want to see an example of this is, you know, Medium. Have you seen Medium, the platform for writing blogs and articles and things?
Yeah.
So there's platforms like that which are kind of like that but provide crypto incentives. And so the idea that you get money per clicks for your articles and things you do and all this kind of stuff. And so I know people who write articles for these different platforms that have sort of, for every X number of likes you get X, you know, Ethereum or something. Or if it ends up being, unironically, a sort of pyramid scheme, because you start to know people who are big fish on the platform, who have lots of followers, who then link to their friends' articles. If you can get 50 people to follow that chain down, it's not just about being nice anymore. It's like you've given them money because those people will like their post and that'll feed the algorithm for their thing. And I started noticing, because I was talking to these people and they're like, look, sometimes I'll just put out an article for the sake of it, that I will pick up anything that I don't care about just so I can link the 3 other articles written by friends of mine, and we're effectively causing this ricochet of money being fed into this system. And it's like, nobody cares anymore. Like, why are you making content? Like, you're not making content, it's a free money system at that stage, right? And these were people who joined the platform because they loved writing and they wanted to join it to write things they cared about. And then they thought, it'll be nice if I get money as a nice reward for doing the writing. And I watched them turn cynical, because once you're at the point where you can pour your heart and soul into an article for a month and release it, and you get a bunch of likes for it, that's fine. Or you can write 10 clickbaity articles and get thousands and thousands for that. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, why am I... If this is about money, then it's about money. And this isn't to say being about money is bad. It just means there should be a distinction. There should be things that are about money and things that are about writing or articles or whatever. And with games, if it's about money, fine. That's what mobile clicker games are for. That's literally their point. But if you start bringing those sensibilities into AAA titles, then all games start to become about money. And you get the egregious example in my mind, which is Shadow of War. Shadow of Mordor was an amazing game. I played the crap out of it. I finished that game like 3 times over. I really, really enjoyed it. The sequel comes out, and you need real purchases to make the game playable. And they've actively nerfed the back third of the game. So it's literally unplayable unless you grind, because that's how you feed people into forcing to do it. And it's like, the game isn't fun anymore because you actively made the decision to make it worse, to incentivize me to have a harder time, so I would spend money into your system to make it playable again. And it's like, well, then I'm out. I don't care. I'm just... And that's if they brought out another game of the franchise, I wouldn't buy it. If they've lost my interest, you know?
It's what you're optimizing for. There was a maybe it was EA, or I don't know who it was, probably EA, that had a patent release a few years back for a in-app purchase mechanic that would basically match two people together.
Yeah, so the other guy would have equipment you will probably want, and they would force you to want to have it.
They would go a step further, though, because it's all about dopamine. It's all about chemicals in the brain. It's basically a drug, because they would say, okay, I'm going to show you this other cool weapon that this opponent is using. You're going to get your ass kicked because we're going to make the game harder. So you get your ass kicked. Then you buy that weapon.
Want to buy the weapon that you just got beaten with? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then if you buy that weapon, the next few matches, they'll make it easier. So you're more likely to win, which makes you feel, ooh, I just bought this weapon. Now I kick ass.
Yeah.
Which is going to increase the chance you're going to buy more weapons in the future. And what they're literally doing is making the game optimized to deliver you an experience of winning, rather than helping you or challenging you to be a better player so that you win. They're making you feel, I mean, it's kind of like the game version of giving everyone a trophy. If you give us money, we will make you win. It's pay to play, literally. If you pay money, we're not going to say you pay and you'll win, but if you buy this weapon, you're going to win for a little bit until we are ready to sell you another weapon. Then we're going to make it harder for you. That's really kind of effed up.
That's also what Fortnite does to a lesser degree, but it's the basic idea that when you start the game, you're up against bots, and it's like, oh, this is charming. This is a fun game. It's got nice mechanics, and then at some point, it turns, and you go from fighting against these absolutely stupid bots that let you get into the top 3 on a regular basis to now you're up against people who've been playing the game for the last 2 years and who are like backflipping their way over your head with 50 weapons you've never seen before. It's like, cool. This game just went from being playable to not playable in a split second.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I stopped playing most of Hearthstone, because I don't have the cards, and I don't want to buy the cards or learn how to use the cards. So I only play the versions where I don't have to have cards.
Yeah, the card games always get me, but I can't stop playing them. The other ones I can avoid, but I gotta say they're also not fun to work on. When you got to work on that kind of stuff, like optimizing microtransactions and stuff. Not that I've had to do it a ton, but done a bit, and it's so. Like, at first it seems fun and exciting. Like, oh, cool, look at this. I'm optimizing this thing and getting all this data and stuff. And then you're like, well, that was boring after a while. It gets boring really, really quick. And then you're like, no, I'm just doing something that's not very fun and just like, I don't know. You don't really think about it, I guess, as like extracting money. It's more of like optimizing the sales when you're working on it on that side. But it's still not fun. Like, it's still like not the exciting thing to do. And I mean, I'm sure you get to the EA level and get extreme, like the one you're talking about, like you'd probably feel guilty, I would think, trying even coding that system, right? You'd probably have a hard time finding somebody who wants to actually code it up. But
none of this to game development, I think, to extract money and manipulate psyches. That's not, I mean, maybe in a horror game you want to scare people, but you don't want to scare them into paying you more money. That's not the point.
Right. Yeah. It just becomes it's like as soon as you get into like business optimization and you get management that wants to optimize and make more money and not fire people or whatever, the financial situations change and people get incentivized and shit goes crazy. But yeah, I hate microtransactions in general, though. I've never been a fan of them. I almost never buy them except for like League of Legends skins. I have gone crazy on, and like Magic Arena.
Well, skins is a great one, right? Think of how the Overton window on that has shifted so much. I remember you would play like the one that really sticks out to me was I remember playing Spider-Man, the older ones, and you throughout the course of the game you'd unlock skins. It'd be like, this is awesome. You just get new skins for your character. And these days, like, I honestly don't expect a game with skins to give them to me for free. I just assume the game will probably charge me for any skin that's in it. But then a game like Mario Odyssey comes out, and you're like, wait, I get skins throughout the game just for playing the game? And it's such a, like, it's so weird that I find that as a unique, fun benefit, right? And then Spider-Man did the same thing. You have all these new skins for the characters you play, and it's like, wow, this is in the game? I don't have to buy this as an add-on? This is great. And it's so funny how it's gone from being something that used to be deplorable as an idea to now it's like, oh, no, that's the default. Getting them for free, that's the bonus. That's the nice thing.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I think for me, a lot of games suddenly felt like they were, like I'm thinking Civilization games where they were delivered knowing full well that in a month there would be a new add-on pack. So the real game is really MVP. With the plan, they know they're going to come out with the expansion, so they have to design the whole pipeline knowing that they're going to deliver a game that's not as good as it will be when you spend more money later.
When you buy
big
the
one for that is
bundle.
the worst is the classic on-disc DLC, right? There's something really icky about having a disc which literally has additional content that you can't have until you pay money third-party separately from the product you just bought to unlock the data that's there on the disc already. That just feels so off to me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan either, but I still end up buying the full bundles afterwards, like with all the DLCs and installing it, even though I hate it. I wanted to jump on to a couple more questions. There were a couple about just learning and getting into game development. And this one was saying that he's currently got 9 years left in the military. I assume that's until he's retiring. And just wanting to know if it's more beneficial to work on actual development of games, like building games, or getting a master's in computer science. And apparently currently has a BS in computer programming tech. And I thought it was kind of an interesting question because a lot of people ask the same kind of thing. But beneficial is very up in the air. I mean, beneficial.
What do you want to do?
What the target is, what the goal is.
Exactly. Yeah.
If the goal is to get a game development job, then probably making games. If the goal is to work, get promotions in the military and work in an enterprise place where a master's in computer science is going to help, then that would be the way to go. I would say that if you're going in for like a game job, though, a master's in computer science versus a BS in computer science and some game development experience, the game development experience is going to go way further than a master's. I mean, the master's, you're going to be mostly ideally focusing on some architectural stuff, high level stuff, and management of the teams. But you're not going to actually be working on game development stuff there. So if the plan is game development, I'd probably spend more time focused on that. I wouldn't rule out the degree or anything, but I definitely you want to do the game development part if that's the goal. Again, depends on the goal.
Honestly, I've said it before, is that a degree is like a golden ticket. It gets you into the interviews. It gets you past the front gate. It's the ID that gets you past the bouncer. Once you have any degree, it proves you've gone to college, you put the work in, and that's sort of the lowest expectation people have. Beyond that point, it's now down to what can they actually do, what's their portfolio look like, and that's what matters. Like having a more fancy golden ticket that's now gold and like three leaves of gold doesn't make a difference, right? Like once you've gotten in beyond that point, you should be proving what you can do. So I would be making portfolio pieces as much as possible.
Yeah. The only other thing I'm thinking with this question, game development is one of those things that you don't actually need to go to school for in order to do good. And that golden ticket could be in the form of I've made this game myself, and therefore I've got the my day job I got because I made a game, and that was it. That was the only experience I had, but so if you're in the military now, do you have the time to work on games and actually produce a game that gets published, that gets sold, where when you're out 9 years from now, with the world's going to be very different in 9 years for game development. Technology is going to have changed more than the past 9 years. Will that be enough to get you what you want to do after you're out of the military? And if the answer is yes, in this 9 years, I can produce a game, get it out there, and that's going to be my golden ticket to my next job because I want to make games, great. Otherwise, I would go with the master's because it is more flexible, because 9 years, maybe you won't want to make games. Maybe games will be made in some way that makes it much harder for an individual to make a saleable game. Who knows? So I think the master's is definitely more flexible.
It's a good point. 9 years is a long time. It is worth considering.
9 years is really enough time to just do both. Like the military will pay for the master's and you can do it. I mean, it seems like more than enough for both of those.
Yeah,
and make some games and learn, I think.
Yeah, if the military is going to pay for the master's, then that's a return on your investment right there.
Yeah, and there was another question very related saying, do game companies value previous experience in non-game development fields like web development and doing game dev on the side? And the answer to that is, definitely. So if you can code, especially if you can code in whatever the language is. So some enterprise development tends to come in a little bit less handy if you're applying for an Unreal job, because you're going to be doing a lot of C++, and your C++ is probably going to be rusty or just non-existent. But if you've got Java or C# experience and you're jumping into some Unity development, it's a whole lot easier to get hired and get into there. The other thing with it, if you've got some of that non-game experience, is promoting the fact that not only can you help on the game side, like in the engine part, if you're doing some game dev stuff, but you can also help with supporting the team with web-based tooling that they might already need, or things that they haven't done because nobody really knows how to do it and it'd be too much work, but it's a thing that you can add as like an extra bonus. Like, yeah, I'll do game development stuff, and then if we need little web things, like I can knock those out in a day or two too. So we can have these other external tools that we use, or internal tools that we're using for our non-game stuff. I've known people who also did like the video editing. They're like, yeah, I want to come in. My buddy Lenny, he started as a game developer by showing off some video editing skills. Like, I want to be a game designer. I can do some design stuff, and I can also do video editing. Like, I'll do the trailer work, I'll do the video editing stuff. And I mean, he got in AAA job doing video editing and game design, been a game designer ever since for like 15, 20 years. So it's certainly something you can do. Yeah. And web stuff helps a ton.
I literally, every single technical job I hire for, I will always ask if they have web experience. Now, it's never a requirement, but I always want to know if they've done anything with, mean stack or Node or Angular, or if they've done HTML and just the basics. Because if they have, it tells me a lot more. It tells me that they have a wider breadth of experience. Web stuff is very broad, so it tends to cover a lot of things. There's a lot of, again, it's a small thing, but the way the web technology's gone these days, it's very library oriented. Like, you can't really build something in the web these days without knowing Moment.js or underscore JS or Express.js or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, there's a million of them, and so because of that, it means you're not only going to be capable as a technical person, you will have had to, by the design of the technologies you're in, learn how to read documentation, consume it, understand how APIs work. There's a lot of subtextual benefit to somebody being familiar with web development in general. So I always find that if someone does have web development, that'll always put a big plus for me, because it lets me know they're going to be more flexible and easier to teach new things to than somebody else. But again, it's never a requirement. It's just, no matter what the job, if it's a C# job, I will still say, have you ever done web stuff? Because if they have, that'll be a nice bonus for me.
I think that demonstrates an ability to learn, which is probably one of the key things in any job. If you can learn new things and demonstrate that, then you're probably going to be a good hire. Even if you don't know everything that you're going to need to know to do this job, if you can learn it, then all that other experience you can bring to the table, plus you're going to be able to do what we need you to do. And I would consider any good candidate to be someone who is able to learn new things.
Yeah, in my experience, people who can code in like one language or one stack can code in any other language or stack, and eventually they'll get to about the same proficiency level. That said, there are some people who can code like very basically and very terribly in one stack. Doesn't mean that they're going to be able to do anything more than basic and terrible in every other one. But there are plenty, like, I think if you're a good web developer, or you're a good enterprise developer, a good game developer, it's not too hard to switch over. And switching from game development to enterprise stuff is about the same. It's just a matter of learning the stuff, maybe getting a little bit of guidance on what stuff to learn, because there are so many libraries and options out there. But outside of that, it's not more complicated. And the fact that you're willing to learn and know those things helps a ton, or know multiple things. It helps a lot. And it's easy to sell that skill as like an extra bonus for the team and the company. There was a question about sending messages across namespaces, and I only wanted to click on this because I like to listen to Jason talk about namespaces. But it was just asking how you can have a class listen to an event triggered by a class in another namespace without crosstalk, so without like messages, or without them referencing each other, without referencing or importing the other namespace. And the only thing I could think of is like having something in another namespace that they're both referencing and then sending the messages through, which is essentially basically like making a hub, right? This is without a hub. But I mean, that's essentially what you'd be creating, is some some pass through that you can send the messages through. I don't know what the benefit of this is, though, or why you would want to do it, though. It sounds like it's more of a bigger architectural issue on the separation of things and not so much an issue with this. But I was curious, you want to rant for a second about namespaces?
I'll happily rant a bit on namespaces, right? So before we even tackle this question, I want to talk terminology here, because oftentimes questions like these can be a bit vague as to what's really being asked. So namespaces are not the same as assemblies or assembly definitions. So there's actually different things here that people might be asking, or different questions. So for starters, a namespace is it's like a folder. It's like a bundle of stuff, only unlike a real folder, it can have multiple things, can be all over the place, but reference to the same things. So let's say category. Category might be a better name. You could put a bunch of stuff under the enemies category. And everything, no matter where it is in your project, it could be enemies. Separately from that, you've got your DLLs or your assembly references or whatever, and there are a bunch of stuff that exist in a box that has been deployed separately and that can be interconnected. Now, traditionally, because those boxes are separate, those boxes have their own namespaces because it makes it easier to work with. So Unity has a box. Unity Engine.timeline has a box for all timeline-related stuff. Unity Engine.audio has a box for all the audio-related stuff. Theoretically, the namespaces are irrelevant connected to the assemblies. You can actually have the same assemblies in different DLLs and vice versa reused. So that's one thing to note, is if you're talking about I'm getting issues talking between different assemblies, that's a whole different conversation that I don't really want to cover here, but that's a separate thing. But if we are talking just namespaces, the way namespaces work is they are kind of degrees of complexity of categories. So you've seen this yourself. You have import Unity or the Unity engine. That's everything Unity engine related, and you get all the engine tools, vectors, and all that stuff. Then you've got on a separate side, you've got Unity editor, and all the editor stuff, sharp line down the middle. You don't want to deploy the editor stuff when you're building. You have the engine stuff separately. And then when it comes to using namespaces, you split that up with sub namespaces. And so in the case of even if you're using strings, you're using system. Using system. You've seen that at the top on like most of your scripts. But if you're using lists don't exist in system. They live in system.collections, which is part of system. It is just a subpart of system because you might be making something that doesn't require lists. So the truth is you can't reference something in a different namespace without referencing the thing in the other namespace. That's just a fact. You have to do that. But if you're making scripts, you're deciding how deep that goes down. And so that's why I don't like the Java standard, which is now annoyingly the Unity package standard, which I also hate, which is com.companyname.systemname.whatever, because you're just arbitrarily adding additional layers of complexity to that namespace that doesn't really need to be there. That's why all my stuff goes under one banner, my name, JSON Story, and then subsystems, JSON Story, audio stuff, JSON Story, level design stuff, whatever. And each one's a separate category. And so if you want to reference between two things without having a namespace between them, just put it in the parent one. So create a group one and call it my stuff. And then you could have my stuff.weapons, my stuff.enemies. And if you want to talk between them, anything that goes into my stuff will be available to all things in my stuff separately from whether it's part of the nested subchildren categories. So that being said, namespaces they're one of those things which they serve a purpose architecturally. Like there's a reason why they exist for larger, more complicated systems. A great one being Unity gutted out and replaced their input system. So they have two different sets of inputs, things that are called input with names like action and names like input under different bannered namespaces. And they need that so they can differentiate which one is which. But the truth is, most people, if you're not building an integrated multi-part system, you probably don't need a million namespaces. If you have one big giant namespace over your code base going, my code for this project, that'll cover you in 90% of collisions and issues. The only times you need to care is if you intend to reuse a portion of that in multiple places, or if you want to make it plugins that other people can edit, or if you're doing some kind of modding solution, or if you're integrating with other systems where you want to separate out logging to multiple platforms, or saving to multiple different things, or high scores to multiple different places. That's when it matters. So I would say for most people, like if you're confused about the benefits and values of namespaces, ignore them. Give yourself one giant one at the top and work with that. The only time you need to care is when you start hitting namespace problems. If you're building code and you're like, oh, I can't reference this because it's colliding with this and this name matches, now you go on a research journey, find out why those issues are happening, you'll learn why namespaces need to exist, and then you can apply the appropriate namespaces. You can always just add them later. So give yourself one big banner namespace and ignore the question. That's my advice.
Yeah, I'd probably go the same route. In fact, I generally recommend that until people need it, until they run into the problem, until they have a collision, just don't even worry about it. I think that the default decision of Unity to just not put them in was probably the right one, because it for 99% of the time, they're solving a problem that they don't actually have, which is collisions with other things. They just don't have any
I disagree with you on this. This is one I disagree with you on, purely because
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, purely because if you download 50 assets to your project, there is a very good chance a lot of asset developers have dumped all their crap into the root namespace, which means all of it is going to be, if they've written something called enemy, you're going to collide with, if you write enemy and they've written enemy, suddenly you've installed a bunch of scripts, you've written no code, and then 6 things are colliding. You've got red exceptions in your code base because 6 different assets all decided to write the word bullet as one class or enemy as one class. Right. And you can't control what your third-party assets are going to do. That's just going to be a problem. And so having your namespace will at least do 2 things. 1, it draws a line between your stuff versus all the crap you've added to the project. And 2, it means that your stuff will compile separately from their stuff. Because right now the problem is, if you install a bunch of assets and you change an int to a string in one of your scripts, you will recompile every single asset in every single thing that other people have written with scripts in it if they haven't put the correct bounding separation in their code. So just having one for yourself will separate multiple different layers that benefit you. And these days, you can now do it you can just assign it at a project-wide level. You don't even need to manually go in and set it to each script. I still do that, but you can, I would say, learning to just set it once. So again, I'm not even saying do all the complicated, but just one root level, I promise you will be easier for you than if you don't do that.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's any harm in doing it. I just don't generally tell people to do it until they hit that problem. Because I feel like if I'm warning them and letting them know, like, hey, do this, so that if you pull in these assets and they happen to have a collision, they're never going to learn the problem, right? They're never going to see it. Like, maybe they'll get into the habit of doing it, not really know why they're doing it. And I think that most of the time, that's happened to me maybe twice, where like I pulled in assets and they collided with stuff. Because most of the time the assets are namespace, and if you're making your own asset, you should definitely be namespacing all that stuff. But it's happened to me, I think 2, maybe 3 times at most, and every time my solution instead has usually been to namespace those assets instead. I just fix the problem with those assets not having their own namespace.
The classic alias, the Unity random versus the standard random problem,
right?
That
like, let me just fix their thing. And it's been so rare though that I generally only end up bothering with namespaces when I've got like a scenario where I actually want to deal with forced separation, like where I want to separate out my client and server. Nothing against namespaces. I just don't usually get much benefit from adding them in my Unity games. And again, the default one is super easy, like you said. Now there's really no argument or reason not to use it. You just go put it in there and you have it. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it either way, like Jason said.
And kind of a less and a less sort of scientific answer. Here's just a thing for everybody out there currently working on a Unity project. If I ever download a Unity project from Steam and it's made in Unity, I will decompile your code. I've done that with every Steam game I've ever put on my computer. And if I see an assembly-c#.dll root namespace that tells me you didn't put the stuff in a namespace, I will judge you. It may not mean anything to you, but just letting you know, if there are games, even games like Hollow Knight do this, have a root namespace with assembly-c#, it means, there are scripts in their project, in their root, with no namespace. I'll judge them. Just letting you know.
I'll accept the judgment over the work.
That's fair.
Oh, so let's see. I think there are more questions down here. Oh, there was a question about interfaces, and I thought this was kind of interesting because there are actually some differences. And it said, are there some differences, or is there a difference between calling interfaces in C#, just regular old C#, which would be like web stuff or enterprise stuff, and Unity? I struggle a bit when calling interfaces in Unity. Please help. Can you show me an example? And the quick answer to this is that when calling them, No, there's not a difference. You can call interfaces the same. The difference is that Unity doesn't handle interfaces as well as it handles classes or mono behaviors. Or there are some things that it doesn't really support, like adding interfaces as a component onto a game object, or onto a component, adding a reference to something by interface. You have to do it by an actual component type. Aside from that, though, there really aren't any differences. There's nothing that I can think of else that comes to mind. And that's, again, not so much on the interface. It's just in the editor and the way that it handles interfaces. Can you think of anything? There are a couple interfaces that I want to point out that are built in, though. So there are a couple magic, like built-in Unity interfaces, and they're not really magic. They're in that library, in the one of those namespaces, like the I pointer handle, or
a pointer click handler, pointer enter handler,
pointer drag handler. There are a bunch of those that are worth looking at that are kind of already built in, and you add those and implement them, and they just get called automatically by the mono behavior. But aside from that, I got nothing. So jump into it. You got anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so this is one of those ones where we'll go on a small rant to explain why this is an issue in the first place, because I find understanding why is more valuable than sort of giving an answer directly. So something that people don't really appreciate is, in order for stuff to show up in the inspector, that little sidebar, if you think about it, a script there's no instance of a script. If I write player int health string name, none of them exist yet. I have written a template, a concept that may or may not exist. When you drag it onto an object into the hierarchy, you're not just saying make something conceptually that looks like this. You are saying make one of these things, and it exists now. And so the only way to do that is to physically create it. So outside of your control, the classic instantiation line is being made. Like, it's as if you've called gameObject.instantiate, only Unity's doing it for you. And so it's worth noting that the elements you see in the hierarchy do exist. They are now made entities that exist. And the trade-off for that is, in order for it to deal with changes you make, you change the name or you change the health, it has to save those changes. It's not text anymore. You're not writing 10 into a text file. You are making an instance of a thing with no values, and you are changing the values in the inspector. And so the way you save things is the same way you'd save it in your own game. You serialize it. So Unity is serializing the objects as they appear in the inspector. And that means that that's why you have to use a serialized field attribute. You're saying serialize this. So it'll serialize the public stuff by default. Otherwise, you have to mark them as serializable. That's why it's doing that. If you didn't do that,
it's saving it to a file, right?
Just saving it to a file, yeah.
For everybody,
yeah, sorry.
all that data out into like a file in the file system. Go ahead.
Yeah. And again, without even going too far down that road, to be even more specific, serialization means to put things in serial order. In other words, to take a chunk of stuff in a blown out shape and put them one after another. So it is literally structuring it so it says 10, JSON, duck, just a bunch of words that represent the expanded collection of objects in a line, and then it can send that data across networks or save it to files. So that's what serialization is and why it's there. And so Unity, again, is serializing the inspector. Now, why is this important? Well, because to serialize an object, you need to know what it is. And that may seem kind of obvious, but you can only serialize something if you know what's in it. Now, the point of a class is that it has a bunch of objects in it, and you can then save it and store it. Interfaces, on the other hand, are literally by design meant to hide the details. They're a thing like a shootable. What is shootable? It could be a gun or a laser or a rocket or whatever, but what's in it is hidden. So think about that. You're telling Unity, I want you to save the changes to this thing, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. So obviously, Unity has a bit of a hard time with that, and that's why you can't use interfaces in the inspector. Because Unity doesn't know what the hell to do with it. Like, it's just, I don't know what this is. How do I even save it? Now, that's not to say there aren't ways to save interfaces, but you have to do what's called type handling. And that means that you have to take the interface, find out its type, save it with a reference to its type, and save the data. So when it comes back in to be loaded, it takes the object, creates not the interface type, but the real type, and then reassigns it to the interface type, and it gets a bit confusing. So you can imagine that's hard to do and do well. And so justifiably, with all the other confusing stuff in Unity, they kind of let that one slide because too many weird things can happen if you go down that road. So the short answer is, if you want to use Unity and interfaces, it doesn't really want you to, because if you use interfaces, you won't be able to use all of the inspector goodness. So instead, interfaces are best used as a get component call. So I would ignore them for the most part. unless you know what you're doing with C# and you're using interfaces normally. But if you are, my advice to you as someone who does C# but is new to Unity, you won't be able to drag it into the inspector. You won't be able to use it in the inspector. But if a script happens to have a matching interface, you can call in one of the neighboring components, get component of type interface, and still get it and still work with it. But you can't serialize it as an interface. And that's a subtle difference. You have to always reference it and use it as the concrete type. The interface can exist, but you cannot serialize it as the interface type. So there you go.
Yeah, I use the get component and get components, or get components and children using interfaces, or even find object of type. This is the way that I generally see an interface used, or it's passed in as a dependency, like injected in somewhere, either in a constructor or set somehow, and it's referenced there. So you still can use them quite a bit, but definitely not in the inspector.
And if you want a quick solution to this, it's one of those frustrating limitations you just have to deal with Unity, is if I have something like a UI element, and I've got lots of UI elements that I want to have turn on and off or toggle or different things, like I have a panel for logging into a multiplayer game, or I have a HUD element which has a health bar, or I have enemy health bars, I want to be able to say show or hide on any of them. They're just UI elements, show them, hide them. I don't have to think about the details of that. Or if I've got something which knows how to display health, I want to be able to just give it health. I don't want to really work with the details of what that means. It could be a health bar. It could be a color changing block. It could be, a bunch of hearts that change. I want to give it a number and say display that. So I still want the power of interfaces. I can't use them the way I'm used to. So for those things, I will use abstract classes. And they are, in effect, the same thing. Now, there is a huge kind of caveat to that, but I would say interfaces are not like superior to abstract classes in some abstract way. Interfaces are actually a hack Microsoft put in to solve a problem that exists as a result. Well, Java put it in and Microsoft stole it, but it's put in to solve a problem. The truth is, it's not a special feature. Anything that abstracts your code does the job. Just don't overuse abstract classes for their base functionality. But in short, if you need to abstract an idea, something can be shot, something can be clicked, something can be picked up. You can just do it with an abstract class, and that abstract class can be serialized. So that's probably the better way to do it. Unless you want to write your own serializer, which gets into a whole different territory of make your own types and serialize it, or use JSON.NET or whatever, but that's a whole different conversation.
I generally avoid that and probably just stick with either some interfaces and some finds, or go to an abstract class if you only need one. If you don't need multiples on there. There was another question about hardware. I thought this would be a fun one to talk about too, because we all like talking about hardware. So it says, any recommendations on what to look for when choosing CPU, RAM, and video cards for renderings and 3D game making or modding AAA tier games?
Well, when it comes to video cards, whatever you can get, whatever video card you can get these days is the answer to that question.
But I think they've become a little bit more available with the Bitcoin dips.
Yeah, the crackdown on those,
they're not so hard to get. So video card, yeah, whatever the best thing you can get for sure. But for CPU and RAM, there's something missing too, which is the hard drive. So first, before anything else, I'd start with a good hard drive. Start with like I use a 980 Pro. I'd recommend 980 Pros. They're like $100 now for the terabyte. They keep dropping in price. It's super fast, and it'll make a bigger difference than just about any other hardware upgrade you can do at the price point, right? Get at least one of those, maybe a 1 or 2 terabyte one. Do all your development on that. CPU, I'm a big fan of the new AMD CPUs personally. I don't know about you guys, but I like they're quick and they're cheap, and there's hard to beat, right? The new AMD processors like the 39 series or even the past series, 8 cores or more. I don't know what you guys are using.
Well, my case, I went overboard. I bought whatever I could at max. Like I've got 128 gig of RAM and whatever else. Like I don't need it. I don't use it. I just have it because why not?
See, now right. I also bought the Max. But I mean the Mac computer.
The wrong Max.
Yeah.
I got the wrong one.
the min Max, you might say.
I have a philosophy on this, and this I developed this philosophy when I had no other choice. Now, first of all, I've always used Apples. I've rarely ever used Windows in my life, and I get a headache when I have to because it just doesn't make sense to me because I've never had to use it. So I use a Mac, and any game I make, I want it to work on the Mac. Now, I know a lot of games don't work on Macs, and there's plenty of reasons for that, but I think one of those reasons might be from people who just don't think of it as a gaming platform, and they're not wrong. It's less powerful for games. And so for my theory is to use the computer that I want the game to run on, because if I can get the game working well on my iMac or on my MacBook Pro, then it's going to work great on anyone's gaming machine. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think that's a good general rule for people that are building, especially like your QA department should always have standard systems, and even like your general developers. But when you get to like working on actually like AAA games and doing rendering and stuff, when you have a system that's low spec, everything runs like crap in the editor, depending on, like if your game is pushing the boundaries and you're really on the AAA stuff, the editors just start to fall apart, and you want to have kind of overperforming systems. If you're building a mobile game, like you can do that on your laptop. To be honest, like I have a laptop that I use that I can do almost every bit of development I've done, even a lot of the AAA stuff runs fine on a little like quad core laptop with 16 gigs of RAM. I'd say minimum you want to have 16 gigs of RAM in whatever system you build. I would probably go to 24. I've got like 32 or 48, but I don't think it ever gets more than 20 used. Wait, take it back. There's some projects I could open that would take like 10 or 20 gigs of RAM. And if you're in that case, then add more RAM. That's why I added more. I actually had like 128 in here for a while when I was opening a project that would take up like 20 gigs in the editor. But if you're not in that scenario, just look at what you're actually using and go a little bit over that. Like 20, like I said, 16 or 24 is good. 8-core processor, new AMD one, and definitely the SSD. And don't cheap out on your motherboard or power supply either. Those are like the two things that when people, if you're custom building it, so if you're buying something pre-built, whatever. But if you're custom building it, people always cheap out on the power supply and the motherboard. And every time I've done that, I've regretted it because the power supply blew up or the motherboard didn't support something that I suddenly needed, like another NVMe slot or built-in Wi-Fi or something. So those are the two spots I watch out for. But the hard drive is the most important. I'm going to shut up now. Any other suggestions?
No, I'm just distracted because Blues in Seattle is calling me out on what I said, so I want to correct his correction on what I said. So this is something I want to bring up here. There's interfaces were not created to solve a problem with the language comment here. So I just want to highlight this one.
Oh, okay. On okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. So interfaces to solve the problem of multiple inheritance.
Yeah.
Just kind of what they were there for. I don't know where that comment is, or I'd pop it up there.
So basically, the statement I said was interfaces were added to a language to solve a problem, or added. So the correction there is that they weren't created to solve a problem with the language. They're created long before Java, polymorphism, blah, blah, that kind of thing. Now, that's not true because the concept of polymorphism and abstraction, yes, that wasn't created in Java or C# or whatever else. That's a lot longer. But interface is a specific keyword that was added to Java to solve the diamond problem, or the deadly diamond of death, if you want to call it the full name. So it was specifically created to solve the fact that multiple inheritance is a problem that can happen in a language where you can have inheritance across multiple boundary lines.
The interface keyword specifically.
Yes, right? And in this case,
that implementation, yeah.
And keep in mind, most people here, when I say interface, they're coming from a .NET background. They are hearing the interface keyword. So I'm not saying that the language C# invented multiple inheritance or all the other parts. I'm saying the language Java especially used the interface type as a way to get around multiple inheritance by having single inheritance on an abstract class and multiple inheritance through interfaces. And that's the way you solve that problem rather than actually having a resolver that will solve for the diamond problem. So it was created to solve a problem in Java.
Yeah, I think that clarifies it. It's that specific implementation or the Java and C# interface that was, because I can see how people could be confused on the word in general. But as a C# developer, when I see interface, like when you say the word interface, I see the little blue letters with the lowercase I, right? Like it just like appears in front of my eyes automatically.
And again, like all of this stuff, like if we go all the way back, like again, none of these concepts are new. True, that's kind of like a hand wave, because like the whole concept of how we deal with data starts with like records and how records were originally, punch carding and all the way up. Like, no, obviously none of these concepts are brand new. Like even the way disks are, but it's just the point is that some of these things languages are growing and evolving just like the developers themselves. And so there's a lot of solutions and hacks that are put in place to solve these problems. And so, yeah, it's almost nothing is new in software in the last X number of years. You could argue some functional stuff is new, but even that, there was functional programming long before object-oriented from a technical perspective, even if you count algorithmic stuff with math. Like, yeah, you're getting into the absurdism if you start winding that down through which came first as far as programming concepts go.
Yeah. No, I agree on all that. There were two questions I want to pop up in a row. One was, do you guys suffer from imposter syndrome? The answer is yes. And then number two, question about anecdotal coding. Have you ever been stuck on a problem until a long break, slower sheep, and sleep? Not a sheep. I don't know. It wasn't meant for an Ireland thing. Sleep, or answer just pops in. Any way to help this along? How long is too long for something to sleep on? And for me, I mean, I just wanted to pop them both up in a row so I could say yes to both. Right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, both of those things are true. Imposter syndrome all the time. Get stuck all the time, and just going off and getting distracted for a second, taking your mind off of it, and then coming back and reevaluating it helps a lot. It helps most of the time. The shortcut that I have, the best one that I know of, is to call up like Jason or one of my other game developer friends and just talk them through it. Tell them what I'm thinking, say it out loud, almost like a rubber duck that's back. So the second best solution is like just get the duck, talk it out and explain it. But the best solution is get the duck that actually responds back and gives you some feedback and thoughts on it. So talking it through with a friend or somebody else, talking through the idea. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm thinking. Any ideas, suggestions, or random stuff I should maybe consider or try out. And then that's usually how I'll phrase it. Like, do you have any like crazy ideas, wild things that I haven't thought of that I could just try out? Doesn't matter how bad it is or wild, like, and just try to get my mind flowing on it. And usually that'll almost always shortcut it faster than even taking a shower. But a lot of time, if that's not an option, or I just don't want to harass my friends because I've already done it too many times that week, I'll just stick to the shower or the nap or go play a video game or something else.
I'll do a nap, and I'll specifically think of the question I'm trying to solve as I fall asleep. I don't know if that helps, but in my head, it makes my brain think about while I'm asleep. So it increases the chance that I'll wake up with the solution.
I have literally like tried to go to sleep, lay in bed for an hour and a half and gone, oh, and then I get up and I'm like, I can't go to sleep until this is written down. Like I just won't be able to sleep until I put down on paper this idea that I have right now.
So it definitely happens to all of us.
Yeah. That one, yeah.
I
That's
assume everybody's yes on the imposter syndrome too.
I was feeling that like last week. This was a project I was working on where I felt like an absolute idiot, and I was like, "What am I even doing here? Why am I can't even do this basic stuff that I'm watching tutorials from people younger than me teach me how to do." And it's like, well, that's just what it is, right? Like, that's how you learn.
Yeah. Just got to remember you don't know everything, and you know a lot of things that you don't realize everybody else doesn't know. This is just a question for Andrew, by the way, about different OSs, like Windows and being a Linux user. How do you test things on iOS?
Okay,
so if you're building for a Mac, how do you do this?
Oh God, yeah. The answer is throw away your computer, because anytime I've ever had the horrible scenario where I had to do something for Mac in Unity, I ended up having to find a friend who has a Mac, talk him through setting up all this stupid stuff just to make a build, because they won't let me do a normal build on Windows without a whole bloody pile of virtual nonsense, and you still need the correct codes, and I hate it. Just let me build things multi-platform on Windows.
This is why you just need to get a second computer. I mean, literally, the ideal solution is get another computer. So for me, when I was making the Barbarian, I did not have a Windows. I didn't have the money for another computer, so I never tested it. That also meant I never really got it on Steam. And since I never got it on Steam, I never made extra money from having it on Steam, even though it was greenlit. So I lost money because I didn't have that capability. And I think, if you're making a mobile game and you're going to put it on Android only, and for the Barbarian, same deal. I didn't have money for an Android phone, so it's iOS only. how much money did I lose because I didn't invest or couldn't invest at the time in a $400 or $500 device, you know, or for $1,000 PC that would have played the game just fine, but nothing else. And I think, I mean, honestly, anecdotally, I just talked to an asset publisher. I bought an asset that looks really cool. I'm sure plenty of you are all seen it. I won't tell you which asset it is because it doesn't work on Mac, it turns out. And it looks great, but he doesn't say in the description that it doesn't work on Mac. Now, he says it does, but here, install this package, still didn't work. Then he said, oh, check this box in the inspector. Still didn't work. I haven't heard back from him. My guess is it doesn't work on Mac. Now, I looked up about this asset, and there's a forum post where he says, oh, I don't have a Mac to test on. And I'm thinking, you have been a pretty well-known publisher for many years. You live in a cheaper area. I know that from just working with you for the past few years and buying your stuff. You've got money to buy a Mac. Buy a Mac so you can make sure it works on the Mac. But yeah, I would say find a friend if you can't afford it. Otherwise, invest in another device so you can actually test it. The risk is less about it not working, but for me, the risk that in really the consequence was that I didn't put it out on marketplaces where I could have made more money, and that, I mean, that could have changed trajectories of my life. If, you know, I didn't put it on Steam, and then a couple years later, I went to a GDC talk where they said, how much will you make on Steam? And they were like, a mediocre game that gets bad reviews will make $80,000. And I thought, what? That's way more than I've made on iOS. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but any amount, you know.
Yeah, right. I mean, it could be good. It could be right. I don't know. Yeah, I generally, I think that makes sense. So every time I've had to work on iOS, I had a MacBook sitting next to me, just literally a MacBook with a phone or an iPad plugged into it. It's definitely the fastest solution. But if you don't have that available, like you can't get it, the other option is using things like Cloud Build or TestFlight to build out to, at least building out to a phone. It doesn't let you do the same like level of debugging and stuff that you would want to do. So I don't know what that's like now on a Mac and an iPad or iOS, but before you could at least run and debug and see what was going on and do a build relatively quick. So if you're doing a lot of iOS stuff, definitely just get an old MacBook. Doesn't have to be fast, and a phone that'll work. Doesn't have to be the newest. And use that.
Yeah, 100%. If you just literally have a project and you want to build it to Apple products, but you're kind of like if it's only a test project for you and your friends or something, then literally I would just get Cloud Build for whatever it is, $8 a month or something, and that'll let you make builds without any real hassle or fuss. But that's not sustainable if you're building a product. You need to be able to test it yourself actually on a device. And yeah, I memed a bit, but the unfortunate truth is same thing. I don't have a Mac myself, but I do have an iPad, and I would do testing with that. And I have someone else who has a Mac do builds for me. But if I was ever working on a project that had to support multiple platforms, I would just buy one. Like the unfortunate truth is it's just too difficult to not have that second platform to develop for without doing it yourself. So you can be cheap though. Again, as Andrew said, like it doesn't have to be a big modern one, just anything which will build to it that sets the recommendation for what your standard specs are. So $400 or so will get you something that will work for what you need.
Yeah,
I know people have used little Mac Minis too, like the little $100 box, and use those as build systems as well. But
yeah, Mac Minis are great for things like that.
Yeah, I like the laptop though, because I just had an old one and used that, and it worked. And then I could do a little bit of development and debugging on it pretty easily too, and just kind of push it away when I'm not doing any iOS stuff. Eventually, I think I gave it to my wife, and that's I don't have one anymore. And then she gave it away eventually. But
Macs have a good resale value too. So if you need it for 6 months, you'll be able to sell it for 80-90% of its value when you're done.
And there's also a lot of people selling them. Like I noticed if you go to whatever your local thing is, mine is adverts.ie, but like whatever platform that sells used stuff, there will be at least 10 Macs of various sizes and shapes available nearby, cheap enough, I guarantee it.
Yeah, definitely lots of options. So this question was, as a beginner to game development, do you think I should start with Game Maker straight away, or Game Maker engine, or straight away into Unity and learn C#? Now, my personal recommendation is to go straight into Unity and learn C#. I am kind of biased heavily, but I think that the learning to code and learning to write code that you're going to be able to use professionally immediately probably has more value. That said, if you get really stuck and you have a really hard time with Unity, it doesn't mean that you should just give up. Maybe go back and try the game maker stuff if you can't find a solution around it. But I would start more with the things that you're actually going to use. Go through some tutorials, build out some simple Unity games, some simple like C# stuff. I put up plenty of Flappy Bird and Angry Bird type games that people can build out in an hour or two on YouTube, and there are tons and tons more of those out there. And that's generally where I'd start. And it's mostly just because there's really not a limit on what you can do with it. Like when you get into learning Unity and C# stuff, you're going to be able to build anything from like simple mobile game, long term, you'll be able to build anything from a simple mobile game up to like a AAA game, a VR thing, or an app that runs in your Tesla, or take that C# code or experience and start building web and enterprise things as well. With GameMaker, you're going to be, not that it's limited, but you're going to be more locked into exactly the kind of stuff that you can do in there. And really, I can't advise people to use something that I don't use myself personally. Kind of struggle with that. So I would go with the Unity C# stuff. But I'm curious, do you guys think the same thing, or would you push somebody the other way? I just look at like what I would push my kids to. Like my kids want to learn stuff, like I'd tell them to learn the right thing. Like if you want to learn web stuff, like go learn some React or some Angular or whatever the new popular thing is that people are actually using. They want to do game stuff, tell them to go learn some Unreal or Unity. And dive into the things that people are using. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts?
When I go ahead. Okay. When I started with Unity, I knew a little coding from web stuff and not good. I only knew enough to get done what I needed to get done. And so I heard Unity had this JavaScript version. I was like, oh, that sounds like it made sense to me. And on the forums, and this is a lesson, don't trust the forums. But on the forums, people were like, oh, no, either one's fine. The Unity script, JavaScript, whatever you want to call it, or C#, they're the same. You can do the same stuff. Technically, I guess, end result, you can, but they aren't the same. I found that out the hard way. I learned the Unity script side, which means what I was really doing was the same pattern I did before, which was learning only what I needed to know to get a result I liked, which meant I didn't have to do it the right way. I just had to do it a way, just had to do it until it worked. And then Unity went to C# only, and I was screwed because now I had to understand what the hell void meant, which you'd think I would have picked that up at some point, but coming from a standpoint of not being a programmer and just wanting to get something done and not learning the real principles of development was a huge hurdle for me. So in that regard, I would tell people to, it depends on the person, but to start with learning C# because you're going to end up learning things that you really should learn that you might not learn with GameMaker, perhaps.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I was going to say, honestly, it comes down to proficiency. The truth is if you are capable, if you're not too daunted by starting out with Unity, I would probably just jump to the place that will teach you valuable skills immediately. Now, again, you can still start slow. Like there's some really great courses on Udemy that'll get you really, really basic, or just follow along on the Blackthorn Prod channel. Literally start with his videos, buy his course, move through that, upgrade to kind of more complicated stuff. You'll get a really nice, slow introduction through all the concepts. That might be too much to jump with. GameMaker will be easier, but it's non-transferable skills. Exactly the same problem. Although, to bring up an interesting point about what you were saying, Andrew, about the JavaScript thing, I probably said this before, but I think it's a fun anecdote, so I like bringing it up. So for people who have been using Unity long enough, they remember Unity used to support 3 languages. It used to be Boo, JavaScript, and C#. And a lot of people thought JavaScript in Unity was JavaScript. It wasn't ever actually JavaScript. What it was a DSL, or domain-specific language, which is you would write code that would be syntax checked as if it's JavaScript, and then when the time came, it would compile it into C#. So So you were always writing C#. You were just writing it through another layer of abstraction, which led to some confusion because one of the biggest issues I had is way back in Unity 4 days, when you downloaded an asset, it was a coin flip whether the asset code came in the JavaScript version or the C# version. And what the problem was, it didn't really matter what the code is written in conceptually, but where the actual problem came in, to talk between the two systems required a bit of interoperation because the Java version had to be or JavaScript, had to be compiled into C# to use, and so you actually couldn't just reference one to the other freely. There was this like weird layer in the middle where you had to like call into the other one, and that made the whole thing even more confusing because you had to basically like cross languages conceptually just to use it. So it was always a bit of a mess, and I honestly hated every single time I opened up anything in Unity that had JavaScript-ish stuff in it. So I was absolutely delighted when they officially sort of moved away from all of that.
Killed it. Yeah, I remember. I think it was just a one-way references that you could do, right? You could only reference them from like JavaScript to C# or C# to JavaScript, and you had to pick the direction, and you couldn't change it, right? So if you had assets that were both, you were kind of out of luck if they needed to reference each other. It would be kind of a mess. But
there were definitely times when I think I was trying to use Prime 31. I think that's the publisher that I was trying to use their stuff, and I couldn't because I didn't know any C# stuff, and they were all C#. And they were very much, you have to learn C#. We won't help you.
And the thing is, right, it wasn't just you either. I was someone who knew C#. I was someone who knew JavaScript, but even I couldn't use the damn interconnected connection between the two, because even though I know both languages well enough to write code in them, the way you actually talk between them was so fucking obtuse that I ended up having to drop half the code base. And you'd buy an asset expecting it to work and go, oh, this is in JavaScript, and it's going to take so much extra work to manage its dependencies separately that I'm out. I will just do it myself from scratch. It used to be very frustrating, especially when it wasn't telegraphed on the asset which way it was written.
Yeah, I remember that happening multiple times. This next question was about solid principles, and I don't want it to go too long, but it was just about trying to decouple handling of user input from an output. And they're just they're new to the solid principles and curious if you have any rules of thumb for keeping things solid. And I mean, I think in general, we recommend like don't follow any specific rules too strictly and dive into anything. But is there anything that really stands out as like just simple things to consider like you're new to solid principles, you have a loose understanding of what they are, and you want to try to remember to kind of follow? There's some simple things you would think to just look out for. Or
I have a really simple rule that I follow for all of my input related stuff that I highly recommend everybody do. No matter what it is, whether it's a player or a shape in Tetris or whatever it is, if it's got input related stuff, if it can move or turn or whatever, every movement behavior it can do, make it be able to do that via a public method and put no input in the script first. So if I have a player, I can always say, go left, go right, go up, go down, jump, attack. All of whatever abilities it has are methods I can call. No inputs, just methods. And there's always something else which uses that, and then if something, do jump. If other input, do move. If, moving the mouse, pass in the vector for that particular motion or whatever. So no matter what it is, make it work such that it can be called, because that way you can call it from an AI script, or you can call it from a different input system. So a really simple way to make sure your input works well, and a good example of this is UI, right? You could write UI that says when I press the H key, show and hide the UI. Or the UI can have a method called show, a method called hide, and you can have something called UI controller or UI input, which takes the UI and if H, toggle the UI. That way you can just delete that script or hide it or remove it or write a new one, and all of the UI stuff still works. If you have to go on a hunting trip through multiple code bases to go, oh, I have this character controller has a line of code in here which moves the character, and then this one over here does this, you're getting into this weird territory where if you want to like pause the game and you want to stop input, or if you want to have people stop during cutscenes, you're going to have this like frustration of where did I put it and did I stop it there? So I will always at least make a separation between my thing can do stuff and then something controls how my thing does stuff. That one layer alone.
Like that's what he's got already, though. That's kind of like the point that they're already doing the decoupling there of that and looking for the other things.
Well, that's good enough then. I would say beyond that point, it comes down to any other quote unquote solid principles are you'll know them when you need them, right? Like I would just read up and then wait till something bothers you about your code. Like this feels icky, I don't like doing this, or this is annoying, or I have to keep doing this. Then look into how to solve that problem. There's no like, you don't just slap a bunch of rules directly on top. But if you put that one layer in, it's then much easier for you to question who owns what. What is our relationship versus a has our relationship, and is this polymorphic, or should I move this into here, or is that a strategy for this? Rather than trying to solve it as some absolute right answer, just ask yourself what problems you have and solve those problems. And the biggest problem with input is I want to change my input, or I want my input to control a different character. They're two completely separate but common rules. I have two characters, an enemy and a player. I want to change how the player is being controlled. Or I have two characters. I want the player to control the AI, or the enemy, or the AI to be controlled by the player. These are two really obvious, common types of changes that will bite you in the ass later. And just simply separating those two layers, things that do input on an actor of some kind, two kinds of actors, that will cover any changes you would need regarding input for the foreseeable future. There's obviously more complex stuff, but just that layer alone will save you so much headaches.
Yeah. I can think of two other, like, if you're just looking for little things to watch out for or like keep in mind. And there were keeping the, when a code file gets too big, start thinking about like what it's doing and just the options of refactoring it and splitting it out, because it's probably doing too much. And I have like a soft limit of about 200 lines for myself if a code file starting to get
Sorry.
about that size.
You mean other
Sure.
solid principle guides? I literally thought in relation to input.
Oh no, yeah, I was thinking of other solid principle guides in general, not just to the decoupling. So there's decoupling. Yeah, I would say keeping them relatively short, under around 200 lines. Not a hard rule again, but it's definitely evaluating. And then watching out for cyclical dependencies, especially across systems, where you've got one system referencing something in another system that's referencing something back in that other system, because then things get to be a lot harder to manage as the systems grow and they become more interconnected, and you end up with weird side effects and other problems. I mean, it starts to break a lot of those solid principles.
Yeah.
So just
In
keeping
general,
an eye out.
there's flow control is a big one. Now, unfortunately, it's far too big of a topic to give you like, here's a rule you can apply every time. But
No.
if you were to at least imagine your code base as a bunch of boxes, this is a player, this is an inventory, this is the game world, these are the spawn points, and if you drew lines between them about who knew about what, try to make sure that they all flow in mostly one direction. You basically want all of the arrows such that it's all referenced up until you can configure it. You don't want things having like cross connections and multiple layers, because what's going to happen there is you're going to end up, if you change this, you break three things. But if these two don't talk to each other, but talk to this, and this guy relays information back and forth, if this changes, only these change. But if you change this one, you don't have to change this one. I know it's a hard thing to describe, but effectively, if you imagine data being sent across your application as like, a train system, and you're taking different routes, you want all of the routes to go in one direction towards something, and to keep it simple that way. So I would just say be careful that you're not. If you find yourself having to like, you've built a system that does all this stuff and creates enemies, and you want this thing to reference the player, you could cheat and just drag the player in, but now you've caused a direct dependency between him over the player. If you instead have him ask the game world, give me the player, then it's still flowing in that one direction, and then you can change the player up here, and everybody who asks for the player gets it from the same location, and it keeps the code simpler.
I agree. Oh, yeah, I'm going to jump on because I know that we could talk forever about that one. This question was about the record keyword, and I haven't used it yet. I was just curious if either of you guys have used it yet. So what do you think of the new record keyword in C# in 2019? Can it be used in the latest Unity version? I think they're adding support for it soon. I don't think it's in there yet, and I haven't.
It's not there yet that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got no thoughts on it. I just wanted to check and make sure that you guys didn't have any thoughts before we went on to another one.
I love it. I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but I mean, I already make that distinction in my code. I already do data structures versus objects, and so I'm already very clearly defining that record line. I just didn't have a keyword for it, so I'm pretty happy that there's officially a way to do that without writing some plumbing code that I've been doing a million times.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it'll be neat and useful, but until I can use it, there's not a lot of point in spending time on it. Andrew, this question's about OS X market shares. It's at 6% declining. Linux is at 1%, mostly server side. Are they worth targeting? And I want to caveat this, that The OS X is at 6% declining. That's probably like OS X usage, not gaming. For gaming, it's probably, I'm going to guess, like 1 or 2% of gaming at most, right?
I have no idea. I mean, the thing is, I
don't know if that's a real number.
In a lot of tech companies, they're majority Mac,
Yeah.
and so I'm guessing that when we talk about market share, you really have to caveat that. Are we talking about every computer sold, which can include a whole lot of industries that are just like, we need 1,000 PCs to do these things, or point of sale systems, or whatever it might be? Or are we talking about, people using computers at their home? Or are we talking about games and gamers? And then you got a chicken and egg scenario as well, where people don't buy Macs for games because they have a gaming PC, but they use a Mac for their other stuff. So I don't know what the market share is.
That is a painfully deceptive way of looking at those numbers. To put it in other context here, there is probably like orders of magnitude more computers in the world than there are Nintendo Switches. But if you were to put your game on the Switch and successfully get it launched there, you'll make triple the amount you'd get putting it on Steam. Which may seem counterintuitive, but the reason why is you've got a dedicated, captive audience of gamers with not many options for games to buy, and it's on a storefront that magically appears your game on their device that's easy to buy. It's a considerably better market to get onto. And Nintendo are particularly cautious about what they put on there. So if you manage to get past the gates and filters to get there, it's almost guaranteed sales. So it's one of those things where it's not just about market share. It's about, are the people on said market buying things? Are they buying the things that you're selling? So there's a lot more data and numbers to consider with that kind of decision.
Isn't there?
I think you pull in that data, though, you're going to find the answer is no. That you probably shouldn't focus your game development on.
I would still say I personally, if I was making a game tomorrow, I would not be going near Linux or OS X at all. Simply because at the end of the day, it's what I would do is I would start with PC. I would take the revenue from PC. I would make console ports and do the console ports. And then if I have enough money left over and it's a small job, I would look into how long it would take. And if it costs less than 20,000 or so for a port, I would probably do the port, and that would just about recoup its costs and maybe make about 20% on top of that. Like it won't be the place you will make the most of your money. There is some money there, but you'd really want to make sure that you're already have a well-selling game before you do that.
I know Andrew's going to disagree, but I want to let him.
Well, my only thinking is, for me, it makes sense to make the project in such a way that even if you don't plan on putting it on Mac right away, making it in such a way that you have the option. So ensuring that you don't do anything that would exclude the opportunity. And similarly, like, if your game is potentially both mobile and desktop, you might say, well, I'm going to make it desktop, but I could see how this could be a mobile game if it's successful. Maybe that would change a couple decisions in the process on, okay, I'm not going to do this because if I do this, it will be a pain in the ass to make it mobile. So you got to weigh your options, I suppose. But I like the idea of developing a project knowing that I want it to work on an iPad and on a desktop. Even if the iPad is not going to make me as much money, I still want it to work there. And that would also mean it probably is going to work on Nintendo Switch pretty well as well. So
I would consider the iPad separate, though. I think that's like iOS is probably a relative. I mean, it is definitely a good target to.
Mobile platforms. Mobile. Again, it's even weird. I would say mobile is like almost a platform in and of itself. If you're supporting mobile, you should support all mobile, just as a general rule where possible, because that's
Android and iOS at least. I wouldn't say all.
Well, yeah. When I say all, you know what I mean? That's whatever. That's like 90-something percent.
That's what you meant.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
But yeah, I think in general, Jason's right on the like building the game for Mac. Everybody I know that's ever wanted to do it that wasn't just a Mac developer building on it because like that was what they loved. They all like kind of started off wanting to support Macs, and then they'd hit roadblocks. They'd hit a problem, be like, okay, well, this only works on PC. Is it worth working around it, to support Mac? And sometimes the first time they'd say yes, and then the second time it would happen, they go, okay, we'll deal with it when we come around to actually doing the Mac support because we're not doing that anytime soon. And then almost every single time they end up just abandoning it because they're so focused on the rest of the stuff that supporting something that's going to be less than 1% of the player base is just hard. And I mean, that's always been the case on every game I've worked on that had max support. It has less than 1%. It's a tiny portion of the players.
And also, like, it's one of those things where there are entire companies whose sole job is to port projects, like Unity projects, from one platform to another. And so the way I would look at it is, make a game, make it successful. If you're making so much money that people are like really into your game and people are asking you for a version on platform X, look into your options. Traditionally, it costs between 20,000 and 50,000 to port your game. Just like hand it to somebody and say, make this happen. I don't want to deal with this. Someone will do it for me. That might be good enough for you. If you have a good enough audience, you could just like outsource that problem. So that's something that I would, if you're already making money, then you can consider it. But if you're trying to make it from the start to support that, that's probably going to slow you down enough that I wouldn't bother myself.
Yeah. That's where I'm at too. But I wanted to pop up this next question. Just I don't know what it was in reference to, but just because somebody actually uses a weird trackball, like I mentioned it, that's literally like the one I'm using now. And every time somebody sees it, like, what the hell is wrong with you? So I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one. I actually love this thing, and it's weird. Let's jump on to another question though. How much time will it take if we start learning on our own? Like, how much time will it take to earn a living or good money so that I can pay rent, buy GTA, eat KFC, full menu? Please answer. So that really depends on how fast you learn and how much time you dedicate into it. I mean, you can learn how to do game development in a couple of months and get like the very basics down, get the fundamentals of being able to create like a simple game, getting to the point where you can earn a living at it and be good enough at it. I mean, there are definitely people I've met that could do it within the first year who were into it. They were interested enough and they were really learning a lot. And within a first year, they were able to get either entry-level jobs or internships. A lot of them just got started off like junior level developer jobs in the first year or two, just self-taught, learning on their own. Some of them have been going to college along the way on the side. But I mean, I even look at like my 13-year-old son. He's learned how to make or write code on his own and do web pages and bots and all kinds of stuff. And like by the time he's 16, I think he'll have no problem getting a full-time dev job if he wanted to. Like he's at that point where just reading and writing code, going through it. But anyway, he spends hours every day just doing it and having fun with it. So if you're into it and you have a lot of fun with it, I think that maybe a year or two. But I mean, to earn a living really comes down to getting a job, though. I mean, you're not going to. I want to be really clear on that. You're not going to be making your own games in a year or two, releasing them and making a ton of money. But you could be able to get to the point where you can get, depending on your higher ability and how good you are at getting jobs, you should be able to do the job of a junior developer or an entry level developer and get hired within a year or two, maybe. I don't know. I'd say I probably had about a year worth of useful experience when I got my first game dev, like where I actually was learning something usable. The stuff I could probably teach somebody in 3 months if I went really hardcore on it. The amount that I knew when I got my first job. But I don't know. What do you guys think? It's been so long since I've done this. I feel kind of out of touch too.
Well, my standards are too high as well. Like I won't hire somebody on a project I'm actually making without 4 or 5 years experience. Because I don't mind tutoring people, and if I'm working for somebody else, I will often tutor junior developers as part of that job. I have no problem teaching and helping people. But if it's my project, I'm sorry, but like people pay me to teach them. I'm not going to teach you and then pay you to teach you. That's just something I don't have time to be doing. And so here's my kind of blunt answer to this. If you want to make money, don't start making games. What happens is get a normal job, get a job as a software developer, earn money, use that money to have a nest egg to learn to make games. You are now at a point in your life where you will have the resources to take a risk, because that is what it is. It is a risk. If you are basically young and in college and saying, oh, I want to make games, and how long will it take for me to start earning money making games? The answer is never. Forever? Who knows? Yesterday? There's no concept of time with that. It's going to be as long as it takes for that to evaluate out. And the truth is, probably more than you'd like. Now, Jason Weimann will be probably more hopeful than I will on this, but I'm a pragmatist. I would say if you were basically going into making games with an intent of it being your lifetime career as your starting point, that's a big gamble. You're basically, it's like the classic, how long will it take for me to sell my paintings like Picasso's? Like, you can't. The answer is you won't, probably. What you're better off doing is getting a job that is transferable skills. You can learn how to write code. Forget about games just briefly, but just learn to write code. Take a couple of years. That'll be useful in writing games and writing apps and writing websites and writing everything else. And then you can take that information and start making games on the side, or start trying to work at a games company, but you are now set up for life. You could work anywhere that requires code, anywhere. So how long does it take to learn to write code? A year or two. How long does it take to be good at it, to the point where I might hire you? 4 or 5 years. But I just wouldn't start there. Like, again, I'm not saying if you're a student you can't make games for fun, but realize that's what you're doing. You are learning it because you enjoy it, and you hope to someday get that career, but you have to be realistic about that middle ground and learn a skill that will get you money before the assumption that the only way to make money is that your game will sell and you'll be a millionaire. Like, that is, you can't rely on you make something so successful people buy it, or you become so innately good at game development that companies hire you. Those are just too vague and outlandish. Learn a skill that will work anywhere, and then aim for your goal with that in your back pocket. At least that's what I do. Again, that's just my advice.
Are you suggesting that you can't just make another game like Flappy Bird and go viral? Because I would just make game, then step 2 is
Good
go viral.
point. Yeah. I forgot. You can always just make the successful game.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the goal of like making your own game, like the first one, releasing it and being super rich off of it, is definitely a rough one. But depending on where you are, and I can definitely see the Ireland popping out here. Depending on where you are, getting an entry-level game job is not always that impossible. I mean, where I am right now, I'm near LA, so there's a ridiculous number of studios here. There's all kinds of startups. There's mobile startups, console startups, PC game startups. There's lots and lots of stuff here. And you could definitely get into that industry if you've got some game dev experience. Getting a AAA game dev job with zero experience is extremely hard, but getting a indie game dev job or a smaller, like you look at the mobile studios that release games that get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of installs, they're always hiring. There are a lot of studios out there that are hiring junior and entry-level developers, and I'm probably heavily biased too because I see a lot of them at things like meetups. Like I go to the local Unity meetups and I talk to the developers there who are also the ones that are also, they're learning on their own or learning in school, and they're also very active. Like they're into it and very interested. So the people that I see doing it are pretty much none of, I don't know if any of them have like got into it and like been even, like consistent enough to show up 2 times and not ended up getting into a game dev job. The other thing that I
almost like proved my point, though, right? Because you've got multiple people who are all enthusiastic, who are all eager, who are all wanted to be their dream job, who are all arriving at the same place. So my point
and they all got it. They all got in though. They all went in for different jobs though, right? They're all getting together at these groups talking, and they're and a lot of them like hire each other, like they refer each other. A lot of the guys I know, like, yeah, I was talking to him, and then he asked me if I wanted to come work there too, and I'm like, yeah. That's how I most people I know that got game dev jobs got them by talking to people or meeting people, at least a portion of their jobs, a third or more of their jobs from that. But the other part I just wanted to mention is that, like, I feel like a lot of time people think that enterprise development is like harder or more complicated to learn, or the stuff that you learn like in a CS degree is more complicated or harder to learn than game dev stuff. But in my experience, like, if you can code a game, enterprise stuff is fucking cake. It's easy, it's simple 99% of the time. There's the weird edge cases every now and then where you have some scale issue or something else that you're dealing with, but 99% of the time with enterprise stuff, you're dealing with, there's an action, I need to process the action and then give back a result. And it's very simple, it's very linear, and it's very isolated. With games, it's the exact opposite, where everything's happening at the same time if you're not building a turn-based game, and all kinds of weird interactions are happening. So I found that everybody that I know that can do game development has an extremely easy time jumping into enterprise stuff if they're interested. They just tend to find it extremely easy and boring, so they don't do it. But if you've got some game dev experience, I know a lot of people who had game dev experience, no problem at all getting hired in a job like at Amazon and Google. And I've seen them do it. Like they decide, hey, I don't want to work on games, or hey, this game died and I've decided like I want to do something else. And I've got these other offers, and they get paid insane amounts for these enterprise jobs with no real enterprise experience. They know how to code, and they're able to learn it really, really quickly. So
but
I
my problem is
afraid of it, but I'd also look at your area and what's actually available and what the jobs
but that's it, right? Like if you took a sampling of 2,000 spots around the world randomly and had someone living in that location and asked them this question, maybe 2 of them are in a place where it's a bustling enough game environment to do that. So I think that advice is fine if you're like literally living in LA. But I think for 99.9% of people out there who is some kid in his home somewhere in some small town going, I want to make games, I would still favor my advice of just sort of like learn to be a developer, meet people online in communities, and leverage your communities and networks you're making to find cool people who you want to work with, find an opportunity to then move over, join them on some game project or something, and then maybe move to a bigger place then. But if you're out the gate assuming that starting by making games is going to lead to financing that will support your dream further, I think that is a huge, huge gamble. And even to bring up the joke that Andrew said earlier, Flappy Bird was his 30th game or something. Yeah. People forget the other like 29 games he made over the span of years that didn't go anywhere, that nobody remembers. So even if you are aiming to be that guy and to make that game, you're still going to be making 30 games first, right? So honestly, it's the difference between a 2-year CS degree, even just 2 years of it, will get you in to any job looking for a programming graduate. You will have so many job offers of any kind. Can you then use the rest of your time to learn game dev and make games and do stuff and then try to really pivot to games? Sure. But doing that starting 2 years will just save you any danger of not having a job. If you instead entirely focus all your energy on games to start, you will have to be successful because you have nothing to fall back on. That if that doesn't work out after 3 years, you have to learn you have to go back to college or something, right? And so I do think just getting yourself that one nest egg is just so much smarter because it means you don't have to give up, but do that first, then go on your dream when you have that, you have that in the back pocket.
Yeah. And my first coding job wasn't even game development. It was writing test tools for Intel. Right, but it was C# stuff, and it translated over easily. So I'm not opposed to like learning enterprise stuff as well. Don't get me wrong or anything, and totally see the difference in areas and everything else. But the one thing I worry about is people who think they're just gonna they've got a game idea, they're gonna learn how to make it, and they're gonna make Minecraft. Like you've got to if you're at that point, you've got to be working on it all day long, every day, and probably long before you asked the question about it, right? To get to that point, and it's still really rare. I wouldn't count on that.
This particular conversation just really hits home for me a lot too, as you can imagine. But I think it's really funny is because I had such a similar conversation years ago when I was sitting there in VR chat with a bunch of people for the first time, and they're talking about, oh, VR chat's going to be great. It's going to be this big popular thing everyone will use. And I'll be honest, I was skeptical. I'm saying, look, you guys are doing great work. It's really fun and whatever. But to me, I'm just thinking, if Google wanted to make a VR platform, like people said, what's going to be the YouTube of VR? Well, it'll probably be YouTube. The day they care enough to make it VR compatible, they'll do it. What'll be the Netflix of VR? Well, it's Netflix because they'll just make a thing that makes it work, which they did. And so when people are like, what's going to be the Facebook of VR? It's probably going to be Facebook. And so to me, the idea of somebody like 2 or 3 people playing around in Unity, making something that'll end up being the big VR social platform was inconceivable. Now, I'll take the L on that one because VR chat is the big VR chat social thing, whatever. But what I didn't know is that when I'm saying this as my advice, they're like, oh, we'll just like go to an incubator. Like down the road, there's a place full of millionaires who will give us money and like pay us to go to an office where we can sit in a room and work on their hardware and make games, and they'll give us money and buy us food and give us whatever. It's like, okay, sure. If you're in that really niche micro environment where you can literally contact people who know people who can give you money, who can build you an office or give you an office with computers, sure. But I just don't think anybody else is really thinking that when they're actually that's the kind of question they're asking.
They were in this area at the time when VR was huge too. And I mean, I used to go to the events. There were people just walking around like looking for projects to throw money at. They're like, anybody have something cool VR wise? I've got $1 million here. I need to throw at something like, and it's going to be huge. So it was everywhere. So yeah, it's definitely a different environment there. And those things also pop up a lot too. It's something to just kind of watch out for when new ecosystems and environments and systems and platforms pop up. It's something to look at learning, and always a good opportunity to jump into a market or to kind of jump into a new skill. I know some people who started, they did no code at all. They learned through doing virtual reality development, and that was kind of their jump into it. Or people who, when mobile stuff came out, it was their first time actually writing some code. They saw this thing, nobody really knew how to do it. They kind of jumped in and dove in and learned how to write code to start making mobile apps, and became successful and switched into full-time development. So there's a question here that I just wanted to pop up, Jason, because we were talking about pun earlier, and we're almost out of time. So it'll take like one or two more, and then we can jump over to stuff. But it was, what's the best for multiplayer games, Mirror or Photon Pun 2? And I don't know if you have an answer for which one's best, but you'd mentioned you were using Photon.
Yeah, well, everyone tells me it's Mirror, but I mean, Photon's quicker, and right now the project I need is quick, so I picked Photon. I guess the question is if you're trying to build a sustainable large game, I hear Mirror's the best way to go because it's probably the one that'll work best for what you're doing. If you're doing a demo or a prototype, you can get Photon up and running pretty quickly. So I would say, as weird as it sounds for advice, Photon free is free. So just register, give it the ID thing for the amount of free consecutive users units, and just really quickly put a prototype of your project and make it work with Photon. And then if it works and it starts going well and the moving the boxes around is fun, then maybe you take a step back and go, I'm onto something here, and then do an evaluation if it's worth switching now before it gets too big and integrated. But I would say you'll get there quicker rather than learning Photon or learning Mirror to start. I would just start with Photon, and then if it starts to scale, switch over.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think if you're not at a point where you've got to pick for a specific reason, especially Photons is easy. I mean, it used to be easy a long time ago. I assume it's even better now. And if Jason's recommending it, do it. So do you guys use storyboards or a physical whiteboard or an online alternative to come up with ideas or plans for your game? This popped up, and I used to have a whiteboard right here, but I eventually got rid of it because I wasn't using it right or consistently. And for games now, I always use Milanote, and I just kind of wanted to pop this up so I can mention it because it's one of my favorites. And I know Jason's got a favorite tool that you like to use now for keeping notes of stuff. Do you use it for this kind of stuff as well, like coming up with storyboards or just like random ideas for your game? What do you use?
I use Milanote for that too, actually, because I find it's a better platform for that sort of like abstract, artistic, vision boardy type stuff. I just don't use it to manage the bullet points, to-do lists and stuff. So my order of operations is, if I'm just capturing inspiration images and I'm like jotting down conceptual features and things I want, slap into Milanote. As soon as I have an idea for a prototype I want to make, I use a different tool called Marvin, or the amazing Marvin, which is a to-do list application, and I will start breaking that down into projects, subprojects, and tasks, and that'll be the things I will check off as I go. And then the one you're thinking of is Obsidian, which I use for all of my like resource and reference information and stuff. I don't use it for project and game dev stuff though. That's more for kind of conceptual connecting a network of ideas. I find Milanote still better for that style of thing, for managing the resources. And when it comes to Kanban board style approaches, I'm torn. I mean, I've used some Kanban board stuff in Obsidian, but I'm not sure if I'm sold on doing that yet. I still think Trello was my favorite for doing that, although you can do it in Milanote and in Trello and in anything else. I haven't quite gotten around to using Milanote the same way you do with the whole Kanban board setup. I might try that just to see if I'm sold on it more. But long story short, I use Milanote too for the visual brainstorming portion because it's very easy to share and work with.
I use Airtable for project management on Infinity PBR to work with all the different artists that I'm working with and the folks who do different things. But for game stuff, I still use pen and paper oftentimes. Although I did have a whiteboard for a while next to me, but I rarely used it. And then Jim, the guy who was making a lot of videos for me, he made a video on using Notion, an app called Notion to make
Notion's great.
Yeah.
Actually, so I don't use Notion. I use the other one I mentioned called Obsidian, which is just like Notion, but it's got differences that I think make it more powerful. But yeah, that something like that is really, really good for a wiki of your own stuff. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and so he made this video that Jason's showing. Jason, maybe you can show the link too, so people can click over. But after this, maybe. But the it works really well for him just to have a place where you put your ideas, and I think that's helpful. I know for me, I've got spreadsheets that I have to keep going back to, which work for their purpose, but they're only for numbers essentially.
So remind me at some stage, Andrew. I'll give you like the sales pitch for Obsidian, and I think I can convince you. I've been telling everybody to use that these days.
I think the nut of it is anything that keeps you organized is a good thing.
Yeah, I use a lot of pen and paper too still. So I want to mention I got notebooks everywhere. But yeah, Millinode is great, and all those other ones too. So.
And also, most recently, I've ordered myself a Remarkable 2 tablet, so I have a feeling that's going to make it to the list of fun toys I play with when that arrives.
That's funny. I've seen constantly. I'm like, I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't need it, but I want it.
It's too nice. I want it. By the way, this is the example of what I was saying about Obsidian. This is how I do my reasoning stuff out at the moment. Not for inspiration and stuff, but this is my like wiki-linked, mind-mapped, interconnected concepts of just general organization.
Pull that one up.
So you'll see here, it's just basically a bunch of nodes of information that all interconnect, that have the references to various stuff I care about. And then each one has a link to these little markdown files, and the markdown files have like structured subsets of mini networks of their own stuff that reference each other. And I have ideas that interconnect, and then I can write articles that sublink to other things, and I can inline embed other people's Steam pages or their Twitter accounts or whatever I want. And it's just this infinite network of complicated ideas that's very easy and searchable. And the way you create it is so simple. You just write one note, just like a normal text document you'd write in like any text editor. And if you don't do double square brackets, and write some other word. If you click that word, it'll make a second note with that name that links back to the first one. And you can just keep doing this, making these linked notes to other notes. And you don't have to think about how it's working. It just magically does it for you. And then when you're done, you end up with this graph of interconnected related information that makes it very, very easy to work with. It's got more powerful tools than that, but at a very base level, rather than what I used to do, use Notepad or Visual Studio Code and just have tabs open with information which is unconnected and hard to search and find. This just like every note becomes its own thing, and then I hyperlink to other notes with this really intuitive search feature, and I can just keep all of my references and cross-reference them and just all sorts of powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've got to get into this one and try it out sometime. I know you've recommended it enough, and I've been wanting to do it. I want to show one other thing in here, though. Let me show. We were talking about references and directions and showing those, and I remembered I've got a Millinode board that kind of shows a little bit of this. So here's one of the ways that I like to just reference and show how things are depending on each other, and it builds out in Millinode with I just drag out little boards and drag lines in between them. And so like this one's just showing a bunch of like higher level systems, and then you can drill down into like the inventory system and see how the inventory data is linked into the inventory. And here it's actually not really two-way reference. I don't know why that arrow's the wrong way. And then everything kind of relates and references in the direction that the arrows show. You can see like the panels are separated from the slots, and then here's kind of like the separation to show the UI. And I like to just kind of diagram a lot of these things out. And when I do them personally, it's not always before I build the system. A lot of the times it's as I build it or after or like in the process. Like I'll have an idea of it. I won't hard force it, like draw it out beforehand. I'll build it, and then I'll make sure that I draw it out and that it matches with what I was thinking. And then I'll look for the errors. Like I'll see, oh, look, this has, maybe somehow this is depending on that. And I go, okay, that's a reference that I want to break and fix. Like there's something wrong here that shouldn't be referencing.
Which, by the way, is a perfect visual example of what I was talking about before, about make sure the lines of your boundaries cross in one direction. This is precisely like you can see that there's a general flow of control in one direction.
Yeah. I'm just keeping it locked there. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that one because...
Well, actually, I sent a link to
about it.
I sent a link to my Milanote just to highlight one thing I really appreciate about Milanote more than most other tools is it can be completely different visually. So I posted a Milanote board that I use, same tool that Jason just showed, but notice how it's vastly differently laid out. It's because I use it a different way than he does, but it's the same tool, right? In my case, I used it to kind of think about a project I was making in Unity. And so I had a goal written down, I had the tasks I wanted to do, and if you open up the screen inspiration board, I took a load of UI inspiration that I quite liked in there, and I had all these other references and stuff, and it's very cool to be able to just like look at things that you want to reason about and think about, and it's a very nice way to make notes that kind of tie concepts together. So I do use it as well for this kind of thing. So yeah, it's cool to note that it's one tool that can be used in a million different ways.
And I can even save your board to my own homepage now, just from having the link. It's super powerful and flexible. I definitely love it. Hey, Charles, I just saw a heart appear. Get him back in here soon. Okay, I'll stop sharing. So I think we're just about running out of time. I don't know if there were other things you guys wanted to jump into or any super important tips that you've been itching to share. Do you want to get out there?
No real tips this week. There's nothing. I do have them, but with the weather, man, I've not been on the ball with my notes as much because I've just been melting here. Also, I got 50% Pfizered this week, so I've been a little bit out of it more so than usual.
Okay, so in about 3 weeks, you're going to be knocked out when you get that number 2.
Yeah, I may not even make it to the thing on that one. There was one question here that piqued my interest.
I must have missed it. I tried to get them all, but I probably missed some scrolling through.
By the way, the name of that tablet was the Remarkable 2. It's a e-ink display one. It's really cool because it's not like normal tablets. It's going to last forever. It's kind of like a giant e-reader, only you can draw on it. And that's what I want the most. I have these huge programming books that I don't want to ruin by writing on them, but they're also a pain to read through in larger form factors. So I want to get the PDF version for some of them and then actually be able to annotate physically on top of it. So that's kind of why I want to get that one in particular.
Andrew, I had a quick question for you. There's a new asset store sale that popped up, right? What was that one? Like a sci-fi one?
There's the sci-fi one, I think, ends tonight or tomorrow night, I think. All summer there's been sales, and Infinity PBR stuff has been featured in some. And I found out just the other day that a few of the Infinity PBR stuff will be on sale for the next 2 weeks starting Tuesday night Pacific time. I guess the summer sales are coming to an end. This is the last 2 weeks of them, and there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff on sale, including a monster bundle from Infinity PBR number 3, a character portrait, and the low poly dragons are being brought back on sale for the last 2 weeks. But I have a feeling that there's going to be plenty of good stuff on sale come next week.
All right, so let's link those. Send me those links, and we'll put them in the description too, so everybody watching can just jump in and go check those out when they go on sale on Tuesday.
Sure.
I had to check that out. I got to look into that sci-fi sale again too. I didn't realize it was ending today. I was thinking I still had a couple more days, and there was a couple things in there that looked interesting. So
tomorrow,
I'm in a very sci-fi mode right now.
Yeah.
So here's that last question that you were looking for, Jason. How do you guys organize core utility code for easier reuse across projects?
So in my case, I've really what I used to do, which was inefficient but it worked, was I would always have what I'd call either a golden or an empty project, and I would use that where purposefully it's a Unity project that's meant to be empty most of the time. And whenever I have a piece of code that I want to keep and reuse, I will export a Unity package from a current project, import into that one, and see if it still works and runs, because anybody who's ever used the export features in Unity knows it'll magically just leave behind materials or scripts, or stuff won't compile, or just all sorts of fun errors. So I will make sure the package works. I will then probably plumose it a bit, add some labels, tidy it up, have it ready, and then I will export it again, delete it out of the project, and then import it back in to make sure it still works, and then I would put that away in my source code repository as like a Unity package I can drop and share with people. That's what I used to do, but I found now that I'm really, really loving the package system, the package manager with Unity, now that they actually have a very formal approach for it. So I just make Unity packages. So right now, like I have a package that I use for almost every project for validation. And so that's under github.com/jason-story/extensions.git. And I just go into the package manager, I paste that URL, and it magically imports all of my scripts for me, and it works. And so I have this way now of, I have a project that has that one in it, so I can add scripts to this project, rebuild it, push it to Git, and anytime any project wants it, I can just refresh and re-download that and get the new code. So now, basically, the Unity package manager, I actually like make dedicated packages for anything that I want to use on a regular basis. And you don't need to put it up into GitHub or something. You can just have a folder which has the right structure, that as long as the folder structure is the same and has a single file in there that annotates it as a package in JSON format, you can reuse that folder by just referencing it again, and it'll import all the assets nice and neatly, which has a really nice side effect. It doesn't put the scripts in your asset folder. It puts it under packages under a package name, which means you can actually have imported reusable code, but have a blank project, which is really satisfying, rather than like importing 4 or 5 things and having like which directory structure is these things. If I'm importing my level design stuff, it goes into my level design stuff. I don't need to have that in my core project. Same with UI. I do the same thing for the same way I approach panels and animations and the types of fonts I like to use and the color gradients I like to use. I don't have to import those every time and set up the folder structure. So I just import my UI package, and there you go, drops everything in and leaves the asset directory empty. So from there, I can start working on my project.
Yeah, how often do you end up pulling that in? Because I've done the same thing where I've like made packages. I didn't do it through the package manager because it didn't exist at the time, but I've done it where I made asset packs and other. Another thing I used to use was like Git repos, like sub repos. But what I found was that I only used them like once or twice, and then I never used them again. I was curious, like, do you find that you actually end up reusing your things quite a bit, or is it pretty uncommon and rare and just there for reference mostly?
I find, if I'm honest, the systemic ones, like the level design tools for doors and panels and things like that, not so much. I tend to have that simply because people ask me, how do you set this up? I can say, drop this package in and you'll be immediately placed in a Pro Builder room with a character controller, with post-processing. It'll all work. It'll be a starting point. But for my own projects, the only two I use regularly is the extensions library, just because I hate trying to find the particular extensions for colors and all the other stuff. I will use those in every single project. So there's no reason for me not to just like make it muscle memory to go add this one thing. And then I get mapping functions and I get color alpha changing and I get just the bare fundamentals of like how I like to validate things, or extension methods to get and add stuff on components easier. Or try add is another one I use a lot. Either get the component or add it as like one call. These kinds of like little things are just, I use them all the time. It's just nice to have. So those ones, every single project, I'll add that. And then about 50% of my projects, if it's a prototype for somebody, I import my UI thing for no other reason than the default Liberation Sans looks like ass that you get out of TextMesh Pro. I'm sorry, pick a better default font. And then there's no color palettes for that at all. Like you end up with this default black and white thing and you're trying to like slide in the gradient picker some colors. If you care about UI at all, having just a very basic color swatches set of preset complementary colors is so easy to mean any new project. I can instantly go, looks good, nice font, instantly set up, and I can just click a button and it just creates the prefab for me. And then there's stuff like, if you've ever done a scrolling section in Unity, just like a standard scrolling list of things, it's a bit of a pain in the ass. You have to put a scroll rect, then a viewport, and then content of the viewport, and then set the content to be extendable with your content size fitter. Then it needs to have your layout element, and the layout element on that needs to be hooked up correctly to other ones. You need to anchor it correct. It's like a whole lot of stuff. But every single time, it's roughly the same thing. Drop thing in, I want to drop children into it, and it will list nicely and automatically show a scroll bar if it's there. So I have a thing that does that. I drop it in, drop, I now have a scrollable section. So just some really basic stuff like that, I do use those all of the time. But the counterpoint is, to agree with you, I tried other stuff. I tried making ones for level design. I tried making ones for like basic inventory systems or other things. But I just found myself wanting to make it from scratch every time. Just like, it's just a few lines of code. I'll just make it. I didn't find myself reusing those as much as I hoped I would. So, yeah, it's for stylistic stuff and for extensions, yes.
Yeah, that was kind of what I found, is that I only really reused anything that was extensions. And then I kind of got to the point, I think that part of it is just that the projects that I built tended to vary so much. So I wasn't building a lot of UI heavy projects or a lot of mobile projects or a lot of VR. It was all just a big variation. So there wasn't a lot of crossover, even with like scrollable UIs or anything. So what I found is that most of the time I would use like 1 or 2 extensions, and a lot of the time I just end up rewriting it instead. I just go, okay, I need this one extension for colors. Like, I remember how to write that. I'm going to go write it real quick and add it. And it ended up being less work because most of the time I'd pull them in and I need to change them anyway. But I know there are people who use them efficiently and are really good at using libraries of their own code. I've never been one of them. I've realized I've tried and failed many, many times. Andrew, I wanted to let you jump in though. Are there any other things you wanted to share real quick before we wrap up? I did drop in those links already so people can go check out the bundles, get the creature bundle and the dragons and everything else. But
50% off after Tuesday night. So wait until then, I guess.
Yeah, go hard them real quick. Add them to your favorites. Wish list.
No, we're working right now. Infinity PR. We're working on some cool updates. An update to the medieval environment that will be adding like more dense facades of buildings rather than complete buildings, so you can build more dense towns and more bespoke interiors with that. Working on new wardrobe, working on a dragonling character that's being modeled right now, so a lot of cool stuff there. So we're pretty slow, but when we come out with stuff, they're cool. So
slow and steady wins the race, as they say, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll link that video too. I think I might have already linked. I linked it in chat. I want to link it in the video here below, so everybody go check that one out too. The one that you had there. All right, Jason, we got your coffee link down below, so everybody can send some coffee over.
And just one last thing too. As we're here's just one last sign off thing. We're talking about reusing snippets of code. I'll admit I'm the same thing. I'm really bad at doing that if it's not part of the live templates in Writer, but I'm trying to get better at it. And something I've found is called Cacher.io. Cacher.io, and I'm trying to start getting used to using it. And it's basically a plugin that connects to things like your GitHub account, but also just generally across multiple things that you use. And it lets you write code snippets and then grab them and paste them into various things. So I'm not going to recommend it yet because I've not started using it, but it looks like a really good way for me to have things like dropout stacks and basic code for singletons and for reusable factory patterns or something, and be able to just paste it in regardless of what environment I'm currently in, whether it's VS Code or Writer or something else. So that may be a recommendation down the line. Right now, it's just I'm looking into it.
Just an experiment. Yeah, I'm looking at the video of it now, watching. It looks interesting. You have to let me know how that one goes too. See if it's worth trying out. Cool. Well, anything else, everybody, before we wrap it up? If not, I'll just say everybody should go hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, share the video, send Jason some coffee and grab some art. Check out the courses and stuff down below too. I can't point like this. And we'll be back here next week. And then Andrew, you got a couple things coming out this week too, right? Video?
No new videos right now, actually.
Well, we'll link to Andrew's channel anyway and go check it out. So when he does, and make sure you subscribe there and subscribe to Jason Story's channel. He's going to make it any day now. God, this backwards stuff gets me. Jason Story going to make a channel any day now for you to subscribe to as well. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Yeah, don't forget to share and all that stuff, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Now, let me find the button. Where's the button that makes us all disappear? There it is.